The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Welcome to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. And whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or on your connected device, it is great to have your company. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. An awful lot to talk about today, at home and abroad, as is often the case. Extraordinary revelation, but it isn't extraordinary at all, because, of course, it's completely obvious, isn't it? Britain may well get stuck with this Jew-hating, pro-Hamas Channel migrant, who was identified by the Campaign for Anti-Semitism, not by our authorities. I mean, a charity can identify him, but not the authorities, bizarrely. This is due, of course, to human rights laws. That means that Abu Wadi, who called openly for death to all Jews, not just even ones in Israel, said the quiet bit out loud, didn't he, is in custody as after following his arrest on Sunday night. 3 days. 3 days after he arrived here in the UK and was able to wander freely. However, the Home Office guidelines prevent migrants from being sent back to Gaza because of the inhumane conditions there, meaning that he'll probably be allowed to stay. This simply cannot be allowed to continue. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What is your reaction? I mean, let's face it, it's not surprise, is it? It's not surprise. But what do you think needs to be done? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK in your message to 87222. You can send us a WhatsApp as well, of course, on the same number, 0344 499 1000. You can get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1, standard network rate message. We're also going to be talking about some very, frankly, encouraging things being said by Keir Starmer at this meeting of MPs last night, where Keir Starmer vowed to press ahead with benefit cuts. He said the welfare system was, in his words, unsustainable, indefensible and unfair. I wonder if a Conservative Prime Minister had said the same thing, he would be up in arms, though, about it, wouldn't he? But maybe he's got to the realisation that a £70 billion a year cost for our welfare system, as it will be in a few years' time, is genuinely unsustainable. Love to hear your thoughts on that. Plus, obviously, let's talk about Ukraine as well. Ukraine attacked Moscow with drones overnight, the biggest Ukrainian drone attack on Russia in 3 years. One person was killed, multiple injuries. This comes as crucial negotiations between the US and Ukraine in Saudi Arabia begin, with the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio telling President Zelensky that Ukraine will have to give up land seized by Russia as part of any peace deal. We'll talk about that and plenty more besides, with lots of top guests, including, I'm delighted to say, joining me for the whole show, editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. A very good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Where do we start? I'm going to start briefly on this tanker collision, just because it's so much dominating broadcast news. And again, a lot of it is because, if it bleeds, it leads. It's a big picture of, fire and smoke and destruction. But fires are still burning on an oil tanker carrying jet fuel for American defence fighters, and a cargo ship carrying highly toxic chemicals that collided in the North Sea on Monday morning. The news actually broke during my show yesterday, and we were thinking, well, is this a big story? Turns out this is really unusual. And these are really, really big tankers, both of which are carrying chemicals and oil that we don't necessarily want to have, or jet fuel that we want to have in the North Sea. But it does seem extraordinary that two vessels as large as this should collide. One, by the way, anchored and completely stationary. And if you can see from some of the footage of the radar, one of the ships just literally just basically tearing at great speed towards the oil tanker. One person is missing, the presumed dead. The search has been called off. Everyone else rescued, thank goodness. Worries about an ecological disaster, which no doubt will be massively overplayed by the BBC, Sky and ITV for the usual political reasons. But there is still an argument that that foul play has not been ruled out, because it's such a strange accident to have happened.
No, whenever something like this happens, it always takes a while for the dust to settle. They're still putting out the fires, incidentally.
Yeah.
So we're really at the beginning of this. But there's always that question, was this simple old human error? Was there an element of foul play here? Did the technology, did the radar fail, or is it a mix of all of these different things?
I mean, they were told it was quite foggy at the time, so if someone was on lookout, but you've got radar, but yeah.
It's one of those things that people expect almost couldn't happen in this day and age, I suppose. But as we saw maybe with that kind of spate of airplane crashes in the US recently, these things do happen from time to time, and there will be a long kind of process to work out, if any lessons at all can be learned from it.
You would think there was somebody, in the same way air traffic controllers, obviously bigger concern because planes are flying to each other, come down over an urban area and kill people, as has happened. But you'd think that there would be somebody who, in the Coast Guard, would be looking and going, hold on a minute, that's a very big ship. And that very big ship is heading right towards that other very big ship that isn't moving. It's getting closer and closer. It doesn't appear to be veering off course. Maybe we'll send a message to them to say, hey, you're heading straight towards it. Were there we're told it was foggy and misty, but even so, you'd think the radar. But again, it may well be that people weren't on deck, the watch wasn't on deck. Again, we don't work in this industry, but certainly everyone seems to think this is rather a strange event to have happened. Interesting that it is actually what has been impacted is a cargo ship carrying, or an oil tanker carrying jet fuel for the US Navy. Seems, I suppose, at this time. Yeah. Questionable. I'm sure Elon Musk will blame it on Ukraine, like he blamed that a cyber attack on X, despite no evidence whatsoever.
No, I'm sure he and many others will be connecting dots that probably shouldn't be connected, as they tend to do. But you're right. I mean, the fact that this was carrying that kind of fuel for the US Navy adds an extra dimension to it. More questions asked about. There's therefore more incentive, more motive potentially for this to be something that was intentional rather than just accidental. But as you say, you come back to that point of when you've got these cargo ships, these containers which are carrying potentially very polluting, dangerous chemicals and substances, the fact that there aren't more kind of layers of safeguards and technology.
You think.
It's the sort of thing you just naturally
never dismiss human failure, cock-up theory. I mean, these are nearly always the reasons, sadly, why these things happen. Anyway, we'll keep you up to date on any developments there. Let's talk about something which, again, you could say, these are accidents that happen, and these things are going to happen, and these people will slip through into the country, and and we do our best. This is a deliberate policy failure by this and all previous governments and by our courts, etc. This man, Palestinian Abu Wadi, who left Gaza. Again, I thought we're told that Gaza was a prison. So I don't understand how this guy got out of Gaza for the start. But he arrived, we believe, in the country last Thursday. He was identified by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, not by authorities, not by the people whose job it is, whose wages we pay to identify who the hell are these people. He didn't sneak in under darkness. He was rescued by a Royal Navy ship on a Channel dinghy. Posted about it on Facebook. Nice to know someone's still using Facebook. Who knew? I mean, who knew? And you know, very open. I mean, and on the same Facebook page where he's happily posted pictures of himself with an assault rifle and calling for, you know, death to all Jews, let's kill all Jews, and openly supporting Hamas and Al-Aqsa and other people, you know, organisations involved in the 7th of October massacre. An all-round bad person who we don't want. I don't want him in Gaza. I definitely don't want him in the UK. He arrives in this country and basically seeking asylum here. The authorities don't identify him until the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism do, and he's on the front page of the Mail on Sunday. And then on Sunday night, he's arrested. Having been walking freely around our country since presumably Friday, they obviously kept overnight, often when they're being processed. No one bothered to obviously check who he was and check his background, do the most cursory check of his social media. And now we're told he has now been arrested on Sunday night and that he is being charged with illegally entering the country. Oh, well done, authorities. Oh, well done. But realistically, as the Mail points out today, he's very unlikely he will actually be able to be returned to Gaza or anywhere else because Home Office guidelines say they cannot return anyone to Gaza because it risks exposing them to, quote, serious harm because conditions there are, quote, amount to torture or inhumane or degrading treatment under, guess what, the European Convention on Human Rights. So this guy, complete wrong-un, sneaks into this country, didn't even sneak, openly, blatantly, and now we're going to be stuck with him. I mean, this cannot continue.
I think it also says something about how little we've come to expect from our officials, from Border Force, that someone can openly broadcast the fact that they're an anti-Semitic, terror-supporting scumbag, can openly broadcast that they are crossing the Channel into England, and that when they managed to catch up with him within the space of a couple of days, we almost give them a round of applause.
Yeah.
I mean,
Here I come, ready or not.
That they managed to pull this one off. I mean, it's outrageous that, as the Mail is pointing out, it's very likely that they won't be able to deport him because of this difficulty they've had it with Afghanistan, they've had it with other countries, of not being able to send people back when they're coming from war zones or when they're coming from places controlled by terror groups or what have you. In the case of Gaza, it's obviously both. It's one of those things where you're also worried about the people who weren't broadcasting their intentions so clearly. We did have an anti-Semitic, Hamas-inspired terror attack shortly after October the 7th in Hartlepool. It's a Moroccan asylum seeker who had been floating around Europe for years, ended up in Britain around 2020, was so excited by October the 7th that he stabbed his housemate and a 70-year-old gentleman in the street. There are going to be more cases like this. You don't have to be some fire-breathing bigot to recognise it. If you don't have a border whatsoever on the south coast, people will exploit that to do harm
and we know there's
citizens.
already, you know, a dozen plus people who are on the MI5 watch list. Those are just the ones they know about. But they didn't know about this guy until the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism pointed it out.
And if they can find, this is the other thing.
This is my thing, yeah, exactly.
It's one thing to say, like, why aren't the state on top of this? But also the fact that it apparently isn't even that hard to be on top of some of these cases. Like, anyone who knows their way around various social media accounts and knows what to look for can find this information. And the fact that the state, the people who were charged with keeping us safe, were not privy to this person.
Didn't think it was worth looking for. I mean, I think my number one thing would be every time you guys get off, photograph, fingerprint, look up, give us, what's your name? I mean, again, this guy's got two different names. They all have two different names. How useful, how convenient. It defies belief to me that we'll just wait. We're just going to wait for the next attack.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do. Just going to wait for the next attack. And then when we have the attack, we're going to light some candles and we're going to pray. We're going to sing "Don't Look Back in Anger," talk about community cohesion, and then we all move on to the next one. And that's what we do now, and that's what France does, and what Germany does, and Austria does, and Sweden does, and every other insane country that opened their doors to these people. And it just defies belief that people are going to put up with this madness anymore. And I really had to edit myself with the word madness there.
And you would think we'd have learned this by now. I mean, ISIS were exploiting the migrant crisis in 2015 to go back and forth between Syria
and we're
Europe.
open about it, blatant about it.
Absolutely, and because of the fact that, again, because of this absurd situation that we had allowed to take place, people could show up with no documentation, you have no idea who they were whatsoever, could easily melt into the crowd, as it were, and disappear, either into the black market or into terror cells in Belgium or France or elsewhere. How much evidence do we need to recognise that this is a clear route for importing terror?
I'd really like to hear from you on this. What do we do about this? I mean, I don't even think leaving the European Convention on Human Rights is going to be enough on this one, because we know that our insane tribunal judges are just going to overrule and just say, oh, well, I still think, my interpretation of the human rights law here. We're going to have a root and branch change. And it's something I know Lionel Shriver was talking about this on your Spike podcast on Friday. Which is must listen, I have to say. And she was saying, I think, this is what we actually have to abandon kind of the whole asylum system at this point. At some point, we're just like, this is not something that is even viable anymore. I think it was her saying it anyway. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Give us a call. And this is very much linked in this story. And this is there's some stats that have only been obtained through Freedom of Information requests made repeatedly by the Centre for Migration Control, because the government does not put out this information, and it's been very difficult to get hold of it. Even I think Denmark was the first European country to actually do it, to actually look at who is committing crimes in this country? And again, people, can everyone please stop being racist and xenophobic? No, and bigoted. No, facts are none of those things. Facts are facts. And the facts are absolutely astonishing. And it would appear from this data, from the Ministry of Justice, not me saying it, Ministry of Justice, official figures, shows that foreigners may well be responsible for up to a quarter of all sex crimes in this country, some of those serious crimes in this country. 15% of sexual offences, including rape, were accounted for by foreign nationals in the last few years. A further 8% of convictions were recorded as unknown nationalities. Well, you can guess if someone's British or not, can't you? There's giveaways. So we're going to have to assume realistically that those are also foreigners. So even though just 9% of the population is foreign born, is a foreign nationality, we are looking at 23% of all offenders convicted of sex crimes are foreigners. That tells you something. And crucially, two nationalities in particular, Afghans and Eritreans, who are very large percentages of Channel migrants, by the way, are some of the worst, most profligate offenders, more than 20 times more likely to have a sexual offence conviction than a British citizen. I mean, as it is, 71% overall, foreign nationals are 71% more likely than Britons to be responsible for sex crime convictions. Now, either Britons are really good at getting away with sexual assault and rape, or something is going on. And this tallies with what an awful lot of young women, I know obviously a lot of teenage girls, having a teenage daughter myself, and young women in their 20s are telling me who do get sexually harassed on the streets, that certainly in London, it is invariably someone with a foreign accent who is harassing them. And the concerns about this are, and very, very difficult to get away from. Not, hey, darling, you're looking good. Nothing. We're talking about stuff way more, invasive than that. I mean, we need to know these things, and let's face some facts. Men coming from countries where they have a very different attitude, different culture, certainly different attitude to women and what women should wear and how women should behave and women's equality, are going to treat women differently. And you only have to travel in the Middle East to see that. I've been to Egypt many, many times scuba diving, and it is blatant and obvious, and anyone who's pretending it isn't true is frankly just keeping their eyes closed.
And it's one of those things where if you allow for essentially uncontrolled movement across borders, you're going to create a situation in which you incentivise or make it easier for people who have often criminal past, criminal intentions, criminal proclivities to pass through. I mean, people who are likely to enter a nation illegally, there will be a proportion of them who are doing so for refugee purposes, although one might ask why they couldn't claim asylum in France rather than here. Nevertheless, there will also be a large proportion of them who are just criminals, who do a lot of other illegal things.
I know, we're all shocked by that.
And we've seen in some of those crazy asylum cases, people who turned out they weren't fleeing war or persecution, they were fleeing sexual assault crimes, murder crimes, all sorts of other convictions in other countries. Yeah. And that's why they've ended up in this over here. So you don't have... this is a kind of common sense point that if you're effectively incentivising some of the criminal elements to be able to enter your country quite easily and to stick around, then this might happen. It's not to say that everyone who comes from a particular nation is like that. It's not to say that there are these issues. We're almost selecting for the wrong uns in the way in which we deal with this problem, and then people turn around and are surprised.
And then the bleeding heart Liberals treat them as victims, again, by default. It's just extraordinary. I want to hear from you on this. I want to hear from you, obviously, on getting stuck with this Palestinian migrant. We're going to be stuck with him, and he won't be the only one. There'll be others, again, who somehow managed to get out of the prison that is Gaza. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. What do we do about this? What is your reaction? What do we do? What do we do about this? Because I don't think not doing something is an option anymore. And I think the Uni Party, the Labour and the Tories, who think that you can not do something about it, or you can talk about doing it, or go through the motions of doing it, which is what the Conservatives did for the last few years. Good luck with that. I don't think the British public are going to put up with it much longer. I think this stuff is out of the bag now. People are aware of it, people can see it, and people are not willing to put up with it anymore. And I'll tell you particularly one, women. We're done. We're done with this. This is impacting us more than anyone else, and we're not happy about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. So much more to talk about, including Ukraine, the unfair welfare bill. Not me saying that, I mean it is, but Keir Starmer. Also that prospect of that by-election in Runcorn. What are Reform's chances, and what is still going on? The battles between the key figures in Reform, and rats feasting on the piles of rubbish in Birmingham. It turns out, bin workers, they really are the essential workers. They really, really are. All that coming up. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
We're human beings. We all want to be top dog, Kevin, and we can't be top dog. That's the problem. I can't be loved or liked by everybody. It's not possible. But we have our ups and downs, and hopefully you can make peace. Although I'm divorced, I still see my ex-wife. She still works for me, so it shows how good it is.
If you can work that out, then I'm sure Nigel and Rupert can work it out, except I know that Nigel and Rupert can't. But I do think, you know what they say, Herbie, a week is a long time in politics. By the time we go to those local elections, I think people will have forgotten about this. So after they've broken into our country illegally, and we've put them in a 4-star hotel and given them £43 a week, given them free food, free doctors, free dentists, free lawyers to fight their case to stay. After we've done all that, we then spend money on, for example, for them to enjoy trips to the zoo, tennis lessons, visits to football stadiums, days out, language lessons, and
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater's still with me as well. Great to get your calls on air. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Don't forget, of course, you can call in about any of the topics we're talking about. I know a lot of you still want to talk about reform and what on earth is going on there. I want to bang all their heads together. But let's go to Andrew. He's on the line in Hertfordshire. And Andrew, you want to talk about this Abu Wadi, and basically he's one of us now. We're stuck with him.
Yeah, and he's no threat to us at all now because we've got him. But the real
what do you mean he's no threat to us?
Because we've found him. But think of the others that are here exactly like him. And that wonderful daughter of that MP spoke yesterday. That's the reality of the situation.
Oh no, I disagree with you, because virtually every single person that we've known that has committed a terror atrocity, the authorities have known about in advance.
Okay.
So that doesn't mean it's not Abu Wadi. I mean, again, I'm not accusing him of a terror atrocity, you know, but what he said alone should be a crime. We shouldn't be in the country. But we know him. He's not going to be kept in prison. He's not going to be kept in a detention centre. He's going to be free on the streets, and whether it's weeks or months, he'll be free on the streets.
And isn't it good that the Labour Party are in power and they've got to solve it? I'm not frightened about what I know about. It's the unknown I'm frightened of. And there are more like him in our society. That's the fear. And look at that MP's daughter. She was crying. All she wanted was the truth in a public inquiry.
Just to clarify, people, this was David Amos's daughter. I think this was Katie, I think her name was, and she and her mother were basically calling for a public inquiry into David Amos's terrorist murder, saying that there haven't been enough answers yet. I'm not entirely sure that a public inquiry is going to get to more answers, but I'm not sure public inquiries often do, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be awful if people actually went and on oath had to justify why we keep these individuals in the country?
Yeah, well, we know why we keep them in the country, because we can't get rid of them, because we've got bleeding our Liberals in charge of the entire justice system.
Well, no one ever said, oh, thank God, here walking into the room is a North London human rights lawyer, did they?
Absolutely did not. I'm guessing even Mrs. Starmer. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Now, Mary's also on the line. She's in Hemel Hempstead. Mary, you want to talk about, and we talked about this a lot on the show yesterday, and we will talk more about it on the show today, about what is going on with reform. What do you want to say?
Well, I just wish they would go into a dark room.
I know.
Two of them. One apologises to the other. They both apologise, as I say, to one another. And then they come to a decision that they've got to put the country before the party.
Exactly.
And that they both carry on as they are. Rupert Lowe speaking in Parliament, Nigel campaigning for them.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Rupert Lowe, it's interesting, Christian Calgie of The Express pointed out yesterday that if with Rupert Lowe not being a Reform MP, that actually takes down the contributions in Parliament, written questions, statements and the like in Parliament by Reform MPs down by 46%. He does so much brilliant work in Parliament. Did you see his interview with Dan Wootton?
No, I haven't yet.
It's very long. I have to say, it's very, very, very long. No disrespect to both men, but I have to say, didn't see any signs of dementia, as has been claimed behind the scenes.
Any signs of what?
Any signs of dementia? You know that he claimed that there were briefings behind the scenes that Reform leadership were worried that he had dementia. That explained, shouty outbursts and the like.
I don't believe any of that. It's getting to a silly situation now when slurs are being thrown that are nothing to do with it. All they need is to say to themselves, look, let's put our grievances aside.
Yeah.
Stand together, because they need one another. Rupert's as good as Nigel, and the country needs both of them.
Yeah, I think an awful lot of people feel that, really do at the moment. Just like, put your grievances, whatever the personal egos. The thing is, we need all of those egos. You need people who are awkward and difficult and willing to make waves, but by definition, those people probably find it quite hard to rub along with other people like that. That's the trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, well, Mary, I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater, brief word on that?
No, I think the truth in all of this, and we'll find out in time, probably somewhere in the middle, particularly where reform is concerned. I think there is clearly a sort of backstory of Nigel Farage falling out of love with a lot of people that he'd worked with, shall we say. But at the same time, I mean, to like openly go to war with your own party leader in the press is always going to spark a reaction.
That's the thing.
Plus,
you can't criticise your
themselves.
boss, effectively, and that's part of the deal. Labour, Tories, Lib Dems, doesn't matter. You don't get away with doing that.
No, absolutely. And there's always egos in politics, and sometimes people can get a little bit ahead of themselves. Sometimes they've been retweeted by a few prominent people, and then suddenly they decide that they could run the show better. This is not new. But I suppose it's how out in the open it is. The fact that it involves quite serious allegations, but ones that both sides have very different versions of events on.
Absolutely.
So in time will tell, I suppose.
Indeed. But again, you've got Runcorn by-election coming up. A lot of people will say, look, we haven't got that time if we're looking at, bringing some sanity to the political situation. Anyway, love to hear your thoughts on that, your thoughts on Abu Wadi, our new friendly arrival, Mr. Let's Kill All Jews. And we're going to be stuck with this guy because we've got an insane human rights set of lawyers who basically think these people have more rights than we do to our own safety. It's madness. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Up next, we're going to be talking to the former Defence and Foreign Secretary Sir Malcolm Rifkin about what is going on with those Ukraine peace talks taking place. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning. Welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer and this is Talk. Right, let's turn our attention to events in the Middle East right now that involve Ukraine. Of course, we've got those peace talks starting today involving the Americans with the Ukrainians. President Zelensky, who was visiting the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, has already gone home, but his advisors, his chief negotiator, will be meeting with the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and others to discuss the start of peace talks with Russia, effectively. But we've already had a warning from the Secretary of State of the United States saying that basically Ukraine is going to have to cede territory to Russia. I think we all knew that was going to happen. This follows a massive drone attack on Moscow, which left one dead and many injured. Biggest drone attack in 3 years. Well, let's talk about all of this right now with Sir Malcolm Rifkin. He's former Defence and Foreign Secretary and joins us now. Very good morning to you, Sir Malcolm.
Good morning.
First of all, the significance of these peace talks taking place in Saudi Arabia and the fact that it's Ukrainians meeting, but not Zelensky meeting with senior American figures rather than obviously with the Russians as well. Is this kind of the most likely way we are going to see any peace being actually agreed?
Well, in one sense, this is a very proper first step because the Americans' role is supposed to be to mediate between Ukraine and Russia to see if a ceasefire can be agreed. Now, they say what the purpose of today's meeting is to find out from the Ukrainians what is their bottom line, what are the points they are prepared to concede in the course of a negotiation. And then what should happen is they should have a similar meeting with the Russians to find out what are they prepared to compromise and concede. Now, the worry for the Ukrainians, and not surprisingly, given some of the remarks that President Trump has been making, is that the Americans aren't quite seeing it like that. Normally, you have a mediator who does not have a personal opinion that influences their action. They try to bring the two sides together. In this case, Trump is already telling the Ukrainians, either directly or through Marco Rubio, what they will have to concede to the Russians. That's a very unusual situation, because the prime question, if I was Zelensky meeting Rubio today, I'd say, well, I'll tell you what my bottom lines are and where I might have to compromise. You tell me what you're going to insist from the Russians they have to compromise.
Yeah.
Let's see if it adds up together.
And we really haven't had any demands, certainly publicly, from the Americans of the Russians.
It's worse than that, Julia. Not only have we had no demands from the Americans, they've already told the Ukrainians in public, not privately, what they expect they will have to do. Now, that is a disgraceful way of behaving. I'm not a member of the government. I can say exactly what I feel. It's a disgraceful way to say you are a mediator, but you are publicly not only telling Ukrainians, but informing the Russians what the Americans expect to happen.
Yeah, indeed.
That is not diplomacy. It
has been. I'm very much in agreement with you that I think the Americans' behaviour, or Donald Trump's behaviour, backed up by Rubio and others, and J.D. Vance, has been absolutely extraordinary on this.
I'd make a distinction between Rubio and J.D. Vance. Rubio has got a lot of experience in this area, and I think he will try, I emphasise try, to be as sensible and reasonable in the role he has as Trump allows him to be.
Yes.
At the end of the day, he takes orders from Trump, and that limits his options.
Absolutely. I mean, lots of people are saying, there seems to be this argument, well, Ukraine can't win, but then, and Russia is winning. Well, I mean, Russia hasn't even been able to take back all the territory in Kursk that was seized.
Well, look what's happened overnight, Julia.
Yeah.
Moscow has faced the largest military attack it has experienced since 1945, since the Second World War. And this is by Ukraine, which Trump implies is so weak, it's got no cards left to operate. And despite all the handicaps they're operating under, I continue to be amazed by what the Ukrainians are achieving.
Yeah.
Why are they achieving it? Because they're fighting for their own country.
But there was
fighting for your own country.
It's rather different, indeed.
You don't have when you're attacking somebody else's.
There was some talk in the last 24 hours about America restarting not just military aid but intelligence sharing. Are you hopeful at all of that? And is that will that be in return for this mineral deal? Because
I suspect what we'll
let me
get.
finish your question, Sir Malcolm. But
I'm so sorry. But I know we have limited time.
No. But we've been told repeatedly by Trump that these things weren't linked. But of course, obviously, if Zelensky was going to offer a mineral deal, then sign up to that, which we now have told he would do. I think he's been told by the Brits, by the French, look, you're going to have to sign up to this and just keep your fingers crossed. But this is your only chance of getting US military aid back. Do you think that's what's going to happen?
Well, we know what Trump's normal tactics are, whether it's economic tariffs and trade or whether it's pushing Ukraine. It is to punish them in a particular way and then to reverse course. But having reverse course, perhaps to go back to where you started off a few days later. Yeah. So Trump is perfectly capable of restoring some weapons supplies, intelligence cooperation for the time being. But if at some stage the Ukrainians aren't doing what he wants, he could switch it off, pause it, to use his euphemism for what he's doing. It is not a very creditable way, and it's actually destroying America's reputation in the wider world. Because when you have a president who behaves like that, not just very exceptionally, but all the time, it's not just a question of the reaction of European countries. Around the world, they're all watching the Trump administration and saying, God, if this is the kind of foreign policy he's going to pursue for the next 4 years, then America is no longer a country we can look up to and admire in terms of the government it currently has.
Well, not even look up and admire, but we can simply trust to be on our side. I mean, that is the issue. There's no doubt at all that Donald Trump feels that Putin is a man he can trust, a man he can do business with.
Putin
on the other side.
allow me, I would put it slightly more gently than that. No, I don't actually think Trump probably believes that, but he wants Putin to think he believes it in order to encourage Putin when he and Trump meet, to see Trump as a friend, as an ally, and therefore it is just possible that Trump then will produce what Trump says you, Mr. Putin, have to offer Ukraine in order to get this deal running. I'm a friend of yours. I speak as a friend, not as an enemy. That kind of thing. That's the sort of mentality.
That would imply a sort of level of 4D chess that I just don't think that Donald Trump has actually demonstrated in the past. When we think back to his first time, people say he's this amazing deal maker. I mean, how did that work out with Kim Jong-un? How did that work out with Xi Jinping? How did that work out even when you replaced the NAFTA deal with Mexico and Canada? I mean, there's no evidence actually that he is a great deal maker.
No, that is right. But what he is good at, if good is not the wrong word to use, he's good at making serious threats as to what will happen to you if you don't go along with what I'm saying. And then he may not get everything he wants, but sometimes he gets more than he was entitled.
But there haven't been any threats to Russia at all, have there? I mean, we know a US envoy is meeting with Vladimir Putin. Look, George better than war. We know that.
There was one a few days ago. No, there was one a few days ago. It doesn't seem to have worked very well, but he actually said, President Trump said publicly, if Russia continues attacking Ukraine at this very moment, then we will have to apply much heavier sanctions than we've applied up till now. Now, whether he meant that, whether he'll do it, is a quite different matter. Can I just say one other thing? You said it earlier, and you were reasonably entitled to say this, talking about Americans saying you must cede territory. It's not when you look into what was actually said by Rubio, it's not quite that. It is basically what Rubio has been saying, because cede territory means you actually hand it over permanently, recognizing it's no longer Ukraine. What Rubio was saying, which Zelensky has acknowledged for 2 or 3 years.
You have to de facto recognize.
It's going to be incredibly difficult for them to militarily reoccupy Crimea, for example, or the Donbass. That's the very heart of the territory that Russia has controlled since 2014. So I don't think he means, he may have used the word cede, I don't think he means that. I think he's meaning to say you will have to concede during the negotiations. So you're not going to get that territory back at this moment in time. That may take a lot longer. Now, that is not Zelensky doesn't like that, but Zelensky is perfectly rational. He knows that Ukraine, even with American help, does not have the military strength to recover Crimea or every bit of territory. So the question is how much territory that Putin grabbed 3 years ago has to be returned.
But the crucial issue there is also a guarantee for the remaining Ukrainian territory, and that's what has been missing. Still just finding there's still some talk about obviously this coalition of the willing, which Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron of France are trying to put together. Various different countries, we understand, are saying they're willing to help, but certainly don't want to get involved in any fight. We're talking about a peacekeeping force if there were a ceasefire. Many countries say, don't really want to get involved, don't want to put troops on the ground. We know countries like Cyprus, decades on, peacekeeping troops still there. Do you think it is likely we will see British troops as a peacekeeping force if and when we see a ceasefire in Ukraine?
Well, I don't know, because the British government and other governments haven't said yet what they mean by peacekeeping forces. Are they going to be people prepared to go into combat if the Russians went into Ukraine at some future date?
Well, that would seem to be... I would certainly think that was a basic, but...
Well, in that case, you need a heck of a lot more troops than they're currently talking about, and a lot more ammunition and weapons. So I'm a bit sceptical about that.
Right.
I'm afraid I've got to go on to another commitment.
No, that's fine. I was just about to end anyway. So, Malcolm, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate you joining us. So, Malcolm Rifkin, former Defence and Foreign Secretary. He said time was tight. I think it was his time that was tight. Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Are you hopeful at all about these peace talks in Ukraine? I mean, and also particularly America playing this role of mediator when, well, we thought they were on Ukraine's side, the victim of the aggression. Now they appear to be on the aggressor side, Russia's.
No, absolutely. I mean, you've got kind of one or two options in terms of how you want to read this. One of which, as you say, is that they're playing some kind of dazzling game of 4D chess, of some kind of negotiating masterstroke where even if we don't understand it now, when all the chips fall later.
So
it's
clever,
but there is often this tendency of Donald Trump, there's just like a hole in the wall, people draw a circle around it and say, look, this was always the intention. But nevertheless, it's one of those things where it's hard not to take what has been said seriously. You can't go around saying that you're trying to be the impartial mediator and then suggest that Putin is someone who wants peace, meanwhile Zelensky is some kind of recalcitrant dictator.
A dictator, warmonger.
And going around, yes, he threatened sanctions against Russia if they continue to pound parts of Ukraine as they have done in recent days, but he has also followed through on removing intelligence and potentially military support in the pipeline for Ukraine itself.
Which
so
has
again,
cost lives.
You're seeing that disparity between how these two sides are taken. I think in his heart of hearts, Donald Trump doesn't want to be seen like a kind of sucker where Russia and Ukraine is. Like the idea to just kind of hand it over to Russia in any kind of way would dent his ego in a way that he wouldn't necessarily want to take place. The problem is, I think him and a lot of people in his administration just have a very warped view of this conflict. They've gleaned towards a tendency on sections of the American right to see Ukraine not just as not their problem, but like as in the actual malign forces here.
Well, they're reading abject nonsense, conspiracy theorist nonsense on social media. That's what they're doing.
And that's going to cloud how they deal with this. So even if, I don't go in with this idea that Trump is some kind of Russian asset, that he's desperate to just kind of, hand the thing over. I think it's a little bit more subtle than that. But you can't help but feel that if you are going into it with this slightly warped, shall we say, view of things, it's going
massively
to
warped.
Not rebound to Ukraine's favour.
And it's not Trump derangement syndrome to criticise somebody who you actually could, if you think that everything that Donald Trump did, if Donald Trump cured world hunger and you still criticise Donald Trump, that would be Trump derangement syndrome. Criticising Donald Trump for stuff that you think he's doing wrong, when you praise him for stuff you think he's doing right, that's not derangement syndrome. That's actually what we should be doing. As I know, I'm not a voter in America, but we have a view on what the American president does, because what he does affects the world, it affects us as well. But we're allowed to give our opinion without being accused of being deranged in our hatred of somebody when we're clearly not. Maybe read Douglas Murray's piece in The Spectator, which he points this out, and he's been a big fan of a lot of the stuff that Donald Trump has done. Anyway, we'll take a quick break now. We're going to be talking to Tim Montgomery. He was a Tory, now he is a Reform UK member, about, what is going on in Reform, that Runcorn by-election we're going to be seeing. Also, rather encouraging words from Keir Starmer about tackling the massive skyrocketing benefits bill. Do we really have any hope that Labour will get on top of that? That's all coming up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. This is Talk.
Friendship services. I have no idea what that is.
The text I wrote to Rupert basically forewarned him that the playbook that Zia Youssef uses and Nigel uses for setting people aside in the party that they don't like is one of calling them into question, discrediting them and sacking them. And so when people then put up their defense for what the accusations have been, they're dismissed as being, those are people who've already been discredited and dismissed, and they're rubbished in that process.
We're human beings. We all want to be top dog, Kevin, and we can't be top dog. That's just the problem. I can't be loved or liked by everybody. It's not possible. But we have our ups and downs, and hopefully you can make peace. You know, although I'm divorced, I still see my ex-wife. She still works for me. So it shows how good it is.
If you can work that out, then I'm sure Nigel and Rupert can work it out.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Just some breaking news for you. We've got the sentencing today of the Crossbow killer. That's Kyle Clifford, responsible, obviously, for the death of three women, two sisters and a mother, and he has refused to attend court for his punishment yet again. We are in a situation where got another person convicted of horrific crimes, rape and murder, refusing to attend court and facing the day where they get to hear, witness statements and impact statements from the loved ones of those who they've killed. And yet again, and Mr. Justice Benathan, who's delivering the sentence today, said he chose not to force Clifford to attend via a video link. And he said the prospect of putting a man in a wheelchair, because this man shot himself with a crossbow and is therefore paralysed, in restraints, and the disruption it would cause to proceedings. He said that if the defendant lacks the courage to face today, so be it. Nah, I'd drag him in kicking and screaming with a gag in his mouth and just make him just lie there on the floor and listen. Is it just me? You committed the crimes, you've been convicted, you will face the judge, you will face the family and the victims. Do you not think, Tom Slater?
I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it, where even though I'm sure there are good arguments on the other side as to why, certain defendants' rights have to be maintained, your gut in situations like this are like, who cares? Like, this is one of those things where the Southport Axel Ruda Kavana case, you just think it's that final insult to the victims and their families for them to either disrupt or to not attend.
Yeah, no, you will be in the court. End of. Seriously, we'll just gag you. I really feel strongly about this. It's just like, no, this is part of the deal. It's a part of the justice process. Right, look, let's turn our attention right now to what is going on in British politics with Tim Montgomery. He's a former Conservative number 10 advisor. He's now defected to Reform as a member of Reform UK and joins us. A very good morning to you, Tim.
Yeah, good morning. I've gone from the devil to the deep blue sea, I think.
Well, I have to say, I mean, we've heard over the last few years, one of the problems with the Conservative Party is like it's a very broad church. There comes a point when you go, well, when you're taking in the Lib Dems as well as Conservatives, then effectively you're no longer a sensible church. You've got no meaning, you've got no beliefs. What do you stand for? And a lot of people are hoping that under Kemi Badenoch and her leadership, that the party will move to something more sensible. And we're seeing some mutterings along that way, but nothing really solid. But Reform UK have been doing very well in the polls. They were at top of a number of polls, consistently showing certainly above the Conservatives. And then we've had this big storm with Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. It does appear to be it's been Rupert Lowe and all the other leadership and members of Parliament for the Reform UK party. Rupert Lowe did a big interview, very lengthy interview with my good friend Dan Wootton yesterday. Watched all of it, managed to get through all of it. Certainly he was able to put paid to these suggestions behind the scenes that he may be suffering from dementia and there's problems with his faculties, because clearly there was no problem there. But what do you make of that battle, and what are people inside Reform saying?
Well, Julia, I've only been a Reform member for 3 months, so it's sort of still a new family to me, and it's not quite as dysfunctional as the Conservative Party, nowhere near as dysfunctional as the Conservative Party, but it certainly has its tensions. And I think partly the best way I could describe it is I was aware of the tensions between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage really from the earliest couple of weeks that I was a member. So there is obviously these allegations about misbehaviour by Rupert Lowe. I don't think any of us are really able to properly comment on those. Let process, take its course.
And people should be innocent. I mean, some of these are police complaints about threats of violence. I mean, again, we've got to remember, people are innocent until proven guilty, until there is even a charge brought.
100%. But I'm more of the view that actually there were political tensions between the two men. They had a different view about where the party should go. Rupert Lowe, I think, was becoming quite impatient about some of the points that he was making. And Nigel Farage decided this was not a tension that he would tolerate. And I think these allegations of misbehaviour were more of a cover for something that he wanted to do anyway.
Okay, so you're saying these are political differences rather than personal ego differences, because a lot of people think actually it's more about personal ego on both men's parts.
I think it's more about the political strategy that Reform are having to go through. So Reform at the moment are about, say, 20-25% in the opinion polls. If they are to get to the position where they could be a majority party, they need to add about 10% or more of the vote. And that's what Nigel Farage is obsessed about. How does he get to that new level? You may have noticed, Julia, he's hardly talking about immigration anymore. He regards immigration almost as a banked issue. He's trying to think, how do we reach those new voters, particularly female voters who haven't been, typically associated with Reform? So as he does this, typical process of extending a party's appeal, there are lots of people in Reform, and lots of people in Reform have seen it in people like me joining. They're thinking, are Reform selling out? Are they giving up on their, traditional views? And the danger, I think, why Rupert Lowe's falling out with Nigel Farage is different from previous differences, is Rupert Lowe could lead that faction inside Reform that is worried about selling out.
Right.
So I'm behind Nigel Farage. I think basically his strategy is right, but I think he does need to be more collegiate. I think he does need to find
That's
more
an ongoing issue. This complaint from Rupert Lowe in that Mail interview about, this is, a protest party led by the Messiah. We need to move on from that. But as you say, that's what Nigel Farage is trying to do. And it's perfectly obvious to me why you don't need to keep talking about immigration. Anyone who's seriously concerned about the immigration issue, both uncontrolled mass legal migration and illegal migration, if they're looking at Reform already gone over to Reform. So done, tick. As you say, you need to appeal to more people. And actually, Rupert Lowe talking about mass deportations of illegal migrants, which I'm fully in support of, and I think it's bizarre that everyone in the country isn't in support of, doesn't help broaden the base of the party to get elected. But this is what it comes down to, isn't it? It's, do you want to be a purist, or do you want to get elected and get some of your work done? And this is the thing, isn't it? Nigel Farage says, basically, I want to get into power.
Yeah, and I don't mind that, Julia.
Yeah.
I think I wanted to be in power. Isn't a greedy thing. Is if you believe in your principles and you want to enact them, you have to be sensible. You have to be strategic.
Yeah.
The only criticism I make of Nigel is just, he has in the past succeeded as leader of UKIP, the Brexit Party and Reform, by being sort of very draconian against critics, because some of those critics have been nasty, they've been unacceptable. I wouldn't put Rupert Lowe into that category at all. I'm disappointed that hasn't been more of an effort made to keep him in the party. And I think as the party goes forward, if it isn't to avoid the kind of continuing split that we've seen over the last few days, Nigel just needs to find a way of running a more sort of parliamentary system-based party.
Well, there's lots to talk about. Ben Habib, who sort of left the party as deputy leader, he was ousted, left under bad terms. That he's sort of saying to Rupert Lowe, we form a splinter group. But again, we can't afford to have the right split any more than it already is split in this country, can we?
We're really getting into the People Front of Judea types of factions here. My worry is, though, the venom and the what we've seen on Twitter, on X, over the last sort of 72 hours has been so strong. Whatever the result of the inquiry into Rupert Lowe's alleged, behaviour, I think these relationships are burned.
Yeah, there's no way back there. What do you make of the prospect of the Runcorn by-election, though? Mike Amesbury, after that assault conviction and sentencing, he is going to resign. He says in the next few days there will be a Runcorn by-election. Of course, he had 53% of the vote at the last election. Reform running second, but with only about 15% of the vote. Nevertheless, the bookies have got Reform as favourites for the seat. Do you reckon their chances are good?
I hope so. UKIP and the Brexit Party haven't done well in previous by-elections. There is a difference sort of between having a good opinion poll rating and having a sort of get out the vote operation, knowing where your voters are.
But ever since the guilty plea, they've been working on this since actually this allegation first came up, didn't they? Yeah. They have been on the ground.
Yeah. So they really must at least run this incredibly close, because it will be a real test of. We've seen the opinion polls. but can reform actually translate those opinion polls into real votes? So this will be a big test.
It's going to be very interesting when it does happen. And we always love the first by-election of a new government. It's always good to see. Tim Montgomery, speak to you again very soon, I hope. Former number 10 advisor for the Conservatives, now with Reform UK. Tom Sage is interesting. He was saying, look, this is political strategy as well as personal.
These things often overlap, and I think you have to be a big cynic to think that sometimes there is a personal dimension to it, there's a political dimension to that. Sometimes these things can get all mixed up. Generally speaking, it's obviously not a good look for Reform to be doing this, but I am struck
being split.
I am struck by the number of people who seem to think that the answer is to jettison Nigel Farage. Even if you think it's a top-heavy party and that's a problem, that's clearly not the solution.
Clearly not the solution, I would say, exactly. I mean, again, I think, you can be on both sides at the same time, can't you? I like both men, but there we are. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know a lot of you still want to talk about that. Give us a call on that, 0344 499 1000, and the fact that we're stuck with that Jew-hating, Hamas-supporting channel migrant. How do we get rid of him? This is Talk.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because, as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 3 minutes past 11 is the time. And whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or your connected device, great to have your company. Great also to still have the company of Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Aloha once again. Coming up in this hour, I'm going to talk more about that Jew-hating pro-Hamas channel migrant, because that's a fair description of what he is, who we're now stuck with due to human rights laws. Palestinian Abu Wadi, who called for death to all Jews. Not just the ones in Israel. He said the quiet bit out loud. He is in custody following his arrest on Sunday night, but only after Mail on Sunday wrote a big story about him, and only after the campaign against anti-Semitism identified him. The authorities didn't identify him as a danger to us, and he's only been arrested for illegally entering the country. By the way, that's everybody who's on a migrant boat across on a dinghy on the Channel. So does that not happen to all of them? And why was he walking free and sitting in a cafe freely in England for 2 or 3 days, posting photos of himself? Why was that allowed? We have literally got no control over our borders, and we have no idea who the people are who are coming here because no one bothers to check. And even if we find out that they're a possible danger to us and undesirables, we won't get rid of them. Of course, because we have human rights laws that mean that you can't send him back to Gaza because of the inhumane conditions there. We are going to be stuck with this guy forever now. I'd love to hear your reaction to that. I just find this utterly untenable. Whatever the change in the law, whatever the change in the people who are making the decisions, tribunals, that is necessary, I want this guy gone. What is your reaction? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also send us a message on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Also linked to that, not a surprise, foreign nationals are responsible for up to a quarter of all sex crime convictions in this country. That is according to data obtained from the Ministry of Justice. People from certain other countries, particularly Afghanistan and Eritrea, large numbers of those people arriving on those Channel boats have an absurdly, outrageously higher chance of being convicted of a sex crime than other nationals, but in particular of Brits already here. Plus, the fires are still burning after a cargo ship carrying highly toxic chemicals crashed into an oil tanker carrying jet fuel for the US Navy in the North Sea on Monday morning. The Coast Guard has called off search for survivors, with one crew member of the container ship still missing. We're going to talk to an expert a little bit later in this hour about how on earth this was able to happen. Also, just to let you know, we were expecting the sentencing of Kyle Clifford today. It is going to go ahead. He, of course, is the man found guilty of murdering Louise Hunt, her sister Hannah Hunt, and also their mother Carol Hunt with a crossbow and a knife in a horrific attack last year. He's also found guilty last week of raping his ex-girlfriend as part of that attack. He was convicted at Cambridge Crown Court. He's due to face sentencing today by Mr. Justice Benetton. He has, like numerous killers before him, including the killers of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, Zara Alina and others, refused to attend court to be sentenced. Now, Mr. Justice Benetton, who's delivering the sentence today, has said he has chosen not to force him to attend via a video link. This, he said, is because Carl Clifford, after the attack in which he killed those 3 women, he then shot himself with a crossbow and is now permanently paralysed. I know. I cried tears for him too. Of course I did. But the judge said the prospect of putting a man in a wheelchair, in restraints, and the disruption it would cause to proceedings meant that he chose not to do that, although he did say that Carl Clifford, who didn't attend his own trial either, was an act of absolute cowardice. I just find it extraordinary that people are allowed to do that, but there we are. Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Before we go on to the other subjects, I said a little bit earlier when we just broke that news about 20 minutes ago, as far as I'm concerned, drag him out of his wheelchair, drag him up the stairs, into the court, into the box for the defendant, and if necessary, he's shouting and screaming, gag him. I don't care. I want him in there while the sentence is passed, and in particular while the husband and father of the victims, of course, who's of course a well-known BBC race commentator, and the last remaining daughter, if they want to make their victim impact statements or their barrister on their behalf, I want him to have to hear them. That is part of the justice process. I don't think you should give him the option of not turning up to court.
Especially because it's such a kind of fundamental part of people feeling that justice has properly been done, that there has been a kind of real reckoning with it. There's been that string of cases that you've already laid out there of people having committed the most heinous crime, then refusing to actually face justice.
And Axel Rudiger-Gabana, he just kept disrupting proceedings.
Exactly, and then being thrown out again and so on. And it's one of those things. It really does underline that word that the judge used, which is cowardice. Sometimes it can feel like a strange word to apply to these kind of depraved killers, but at the same time the nature of this crime, the way in which he was studiously checking whether or not the father of the house was going to come home at
text
any
message
point,
pretending to be the daughter,
whilst he did the most horrendous things, and the fact that now he can't even face his own judgment just does speak to that, not only that violent misogyny obviously, but the fundamental cowardice of these individuals when they go about meting out the most horrendous.
And he's in a wheelchair.
He's
in a wheelchair because he shot himself with a crossbow. I'm glad he didn't die. I'm glad he's paralysed the rest of his life and in a wheelchair in prison. Sorry. So if that makes me a bad person, sorry. I hope he's having a rotten time. I want him dragged. I will personally drag the guy out of his wheelchair into court myself. Quite happy to do that. If you need someone to do that, I'm available. I'm happy to leave the show and go and do that. No, I'm serious. I don't understand why people are allowed. You know, it's one thing he doesn't attend his trial. I think he should have to attend his trial. But, you know, at that point, he's an innocent man until proven guilty. The point at which you are proven guilty, you don't. You know,
That's a good point.
I mean, he doesn't get a choice about being taken into the police van or put in a prison cell or being required to do things while he's in prison. He doesn't get a choice about that. Why does he get a choice about going to court as part of the process?
That is a very good point. I mean, that's the point in which you are, you know, you've surrendered your rights because you've been convicted. So completely different ballgame. It's so galling that this is able to. I
know. I mean, maybe he should just declare himself a channel migrant. He'd probably get even more rights. He could do whatever he sodding well wants. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, should we just volunteer force? Should we just all go down the court? We can sort it out. 0344 499 1000. I'm just saying, I just don't understand. We have got to start being a serious country. We've just got to start being a serious country. 0344 499 1000 is a number to call to have your say on that, but also in particular on the fact that we're now stuck with this kill all Jews Palestinian Channel boat migrant. Again, don't know how he got out of Gaza. We're told that Gaza's a prison. I mean, it's an absolute prison. No one can get out unless you are a gun-toting, Jew-hating, supporter of militant groups who committed horrific massacres on October the 7th, which this man is. Hi, Abu Wadi. Feel free to sue me if I've said anything that's not correct, but I'm pretty sure it's all well documented. He's been arrested. He's in custody. Well, he was in custody from his arrest on Sunday night. He was 3 days after arriving here and being supposedly processed after arriving on a dinghy across the channel, where he posted on Facebook. I mean, here I'm in Brussels, here I'm in France living rough, here I'm in Calais, here I'm on a dinghy. Yay, the Royal Navy's coming to rescue us. And then here I am having a cup of coffee in England freely. I mean, he wasn't identified by the authorities. Don't know what the hell they're doing, but he was easily identified by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. They recognise his picture. Obviously they're doing some cross-processing. You'd think, I mean, unless these people are just turning up going, oh, hi, I'm a victim. A young man turns up claiming to be from Gaza and you don't want to check who he is and check his social media. It's open and available for anyone to see and realise what this guy is and who he is and what he stands for. And the idea that he wasn't arrested. But he's only been arrested. This is what I find extraordinary. He's been arrested because he has entered the country illegally. But we already knew that, so why wasn't he arrested before Sunday night? This is a joke. The country is a joke. Our border control is a joke.
And it's a joke that all of the terrorists and the gangsters and the career criminals and the people who are running away from murder and terror charges in other countries, it's a joke that they're all very much in on and we are the butt of. I mean, it's something which
they really are laughing at us.
This particular case, though, I mean, all of them betray a contempt for the state's supposed responsibility to keep citizens safe. In particular, British Jews who have gone through the past few years of being subjected to the most horrendous anti-Semitic abuse, shooting up, by hundreds of percent in terms of not just.
And who's carrying out a lot of that abuse?
No, absolutely.
I wonder.
Islamist sections of the population, and we're supposed to believe that it's. That this should be tolerated, that this should just be treated, it's a one-off, it happens, whatever. Despite the fact, as we talked about previously, there have been anti-Semitic inspired terror attacks which have happened since October the 7th in the UK from people who've entered the country illegally, who had no right to be here in the first place. Like I say, it's a contempt for ordinary people, but particularly for British Jews in the population who have been so terribly failed over recent years, but in particular this feels like a sick joke at the end of everything.
But also, again, with the human rights legislation, we can't return this guy. All we do is wring our hands in his, no doubt, Article 8, right, to family life and all that, some use. Perfectly well he's never going to be got rid of. We're stuck with this guy forever. I mean, I'm not sure I'd impose him on the people of Gaza, apart from the fact that most of the people in Gaza, civilians, yes, agree with him. there's loads of evidence they would agree with him that is the purpose. They support Hamas, and that is Hamas's purpose. The sole raison d'etre of Hamas is to kill all Jews and destroy the Israeli state. I mean, but it very much involves killing all Jews. I just find it extraordinary. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What's your reaction to this, and what do we do about it? 0344 499 1000, text on 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV. But it does just seem to me, Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp says, I'm concerned this despicable man will make spurious human rights or other claims to try to stay in the UK, which weak immigration judges are all too likely to accept based on past form. But the key thing is they were doing that for years. They've been doing that for years and years and years. And we've seen some cases in recent weeks and months where, the Albanian whose son, doesn't like foreign chicken nuggets. How does he know? He's not tried them. And all these other absurd cases. A paedophile who wants his right to a family life with kids he's not even allowed to see unsupervised because he's a paedophile. And yet you're in this bizarre situation. This has been going on for a very long time. This isn't new, but it seems to me it's not just a problem with the European Convention on Human Rights or our human rights legislation that incorporates that. It is actually a problem with the actual people making those decisions. And again, it's like the sentencing guidelines. We've seen this absurd situation where last week Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, exposes the fact that the new sentencing guidelines basically say, you have two-tier justice, and that if you're ethnic minority or claiming to be trans or gay or in a minority religious or ethnic group, then you should have a pre-sentencing report, which is basically around giving you a lower sentence or no custody, at least, having a community sentence instead. And Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, goes, I didn't know about this. This is terrible. I don't agree with this. I'm going to write to Sentencing Council and say how awful this is. Sentencing Council has written back today to basically say, you did know about this. I'm paraphrasing, but you did know about this. This has been raised a million times, as it was under the Tory regime as well. Your officials have sat in when we've agreed to it, didn't speak up. And anyway, you're not allowed to interfere because we're independent. But again, these organisations, these tribunals, all these justice bodies, all these courts, they're all independent. What we mean is unaccountable, unelected, and they're all of the same ilk, and you don't get a job and you don't get promoted and you don't get to be a senior justice now unless you have all the correct views and you've done your diversity, equity and inclusion training. It's all the same as the College of Policing. Chief constables have to sign up to all this stuff. Senior civil servants sign up to all this stuff, and we've just got this entire class of totally and utterly unelected, unaccountable to you, me, or even to our elected politicians, group of people, the great and the good, who know better than us, who are basically running our country now.
And they're a terrible advertisement for this supposed independent, expert-led framework. These people are nuts. If you read those sentencing guidelines... They really are. If you read the kind of equality handbooks which are issued to help judges navigate these cases, it's not an exaggeration to say this reads like stuff that was written by Robin DiAngelo or Ibram X. Kendi. It's crackers.
Who are properly nutty, Black Lives Matter.
If there's any disparity, it must be discrimination that you need. I mean, these sentencing guidelines were essentially, there are disparities in the system in relation to sentencing and so on. So the way to fix that is to enforce a form of discrimination at the end of the process in order to try and correct it. That's fundamentally not how the law is supposed to work, which is supposed to be blind, which is supposed to be about each individual case.
Yeah, but it's like American universities. Not enough black people, African American people are getting in to Harvard, so we're going to basically have a quota for black people, and they can have lower grades than other people who get in. Whites, but particularly Asians. So who got hurt by that? Asians. Again, no. What is the reason? Is it because of slavery 200 years ago? Is it because of the Jim Crow laws, 70 years ago? And it may well be towards some of that, or is part of it that actually, a culture where you've got, two parents and you massively encourage education and hard work, as we've seen in a lot of Asian cultures. Those kids end up doing better than the kids of single parents who don't come from have a home life where that is encouraged. Maybe we need to talk about, the actual reasons. I was fascinated. I wrote a piece for The Sun about the sentencing guidelines last week, and I was fascinated to read again all the academic reports who are very sympathetic to what do we do about black men in particular are far more likely to be sent to prison, but not interestingly for longer, but more likely to be sent to prison. And one of the main reasons actually they put down to was actually black people who are offenders are far less likely to plead guilty.
Absolutely.
Whether they're advised badly or not, there may be a thing, but far less likely to be as good. Now, if you plead guilty early on, you get a lower sentence by a long way. It's a very big incentive in the court system.
And that's something you could address, because it seems to be down to a certain level of distrust with, the state approved brief that you've been given. Some of that's probably going to have to do with historical state racism. Some of it, I think, is going to have to do with the fact that we continue to push this idea that these institutions are institutionally racist. Why would you trust an institutionally racist?
But you know what's really interesting? When they talk about actually different ethnic groups, they break it down to different.
And varies a lot.
But do you know who's most likely to get the longest sentences? Chinese offenders. Now, who knew? Not black people, Chinese offenders.
And it's that lack of appreciation. There are all kinds of different reasons for this. Why not try and address those reasons rather than just try and massage the statistics at the other end through a form of reverse discrimination? It doesn't make any sense. Exactly.
But again, all the people involved in this are also do-goody. They all come from the same ilk. They all come from the same ilk, and we have no say over what they do unless the Justice Secretary changes the law, so the Sentencing Council is not actually an independent body, which it shouldn't be, because guidelines, individual decisions on individual sentencing should be a matter for independent judges, but the actual guidelines on which they base those decisions should absolutely be set by Parliament, by our elected representatives.
It's certainly
with expert input from lawyers, but
that's why it does come down fundamentally to a lack of political will. The Labour Party are up to their necks in this stuff. The Sentencing Council is a legacy of the New Labour years anyway, empowering the quangos and so on. And if you look at these guidelines, and if you look at the broader kind of equality guidelines that exist for the courts, so much of it is referencing the Lammy Review from 2017, named after one David Lammy, of course, currently our Foreign Secretary. They're pretending to be against this stuff now. They were not 5 minutes ago, so of course they're not going to be.
But they've realised the backlash, and again, where they are in the polls. And again, I'm all in favour of politicians realising they're in the wrong. Tell you what I find fascinating, just before we get to a break, I want to talk about Keir Starmer. He addressed hundreds of Labour MPs. I don't know how they all got into the same room in a committee corridor last night. They're talking about welfare and these welfare reforms they're looking at. Absolutely fascinating. He told MPs that the current welfare bill, which is going to hit 70 billion a year by 2030, was unsustainable, indefensible, and he said unfair. I mean, I'm cheering him on, absolutely, if he's actually going to get to grips with this. I have absolutely no realistic expectation that Labour are going to get to grips with this, because the Tories certainly didn't, and they talked a good game, and it's actually exploded under them since lockdown. But I think I find absolutely fascinating is if a Tory Prime Minister had said any of those things and planned to do what they were going to do, Keir Starmer would happily, as Labour leader, and I think did, when this vaguely was talked about before, absolutely outraged by this attack on the most vulnerable and the poorest in our society.
And it's one of those things, on the one hand, you think, how could he have changed his mind that quickly? I think there should be a heavy dose of scepticism with anything Keir Starmer does, because he's taken more positions in the Kama Sutra on every single issue that he's ever talked about.
Don't give me images like that. Oh, good God, for the love of God. Kind of people might be having their 11s, they're eating now.
At the same time, isn't it amusing that if you look at what's happened over the past couple of weeks, slashing the foreign aid budget, raising defence spending to 2.5, then ultimately to 3 in a few years' time. It's almost like, and then you look at what the Tories achieved, which is generally speaking not to their credit. It's almost like now in this country, only right-wing governments can do left-wing things and vice versa. Like that's the only thing they're allowed to get away with. So maybe it will be successful, but just because for whatever reason, we've become in this kind of twisty turny world. But
it's all just a start. And again, even when they talk about their civil service reforms and getting rid of people in the civil service, they're talking at 2%. More than 2% would leave every year just to go and get another job or retire. So it doesn't, none of it. Do I think there'll be any real difference at the end of 4 years? No, I do not. Love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Lots of calls already coming in, lots of topics we're talking about. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We'll get to those calls up next. This is Talk.
text I wrote to Rupert basically forewarned him that the playbook that Zia Yusuf uses and Nigel uses for setting people aside in the party that they don't like is one of calling them into question, discrediting them and sacking them. And so when people then put up their defence for what the accusations have been, they're dismissed as being, you know, those are people who've already been discredited and dismissed, and they're rubbished in that process.
We're human beings. We all want to be top dog, Kevin, and we can't be top dog. That's just the problem. I can't be loved or liked by everybody. It's not possible. But you have ups and downs, and hopefully you can make peace. You know, although I'm divorced, I feel...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Let's get to your calls on all the different topics we're talking about today right now. Robert is on the line in Leicestershire. And Robert, you're in agreement with Tom and me about this Kyle Clifford, convicted triple murderer and rapist, refusing to attend court and not being forced by the judge even to watch it via video link. What do you make of it?
I entirely agree, Julia. I'm quite sure if I'd committed a crime, I'd have been dragged in screaming. I don't even think he should be given the option, to be honest with you. I think it's an outrage, and I entirely agree with Tom. I think it's a gross insult to the family, as if they haven't gone through enough. The other thing I'd like to say is that I think I'm going to suggest that we change Prime Minister's question time to Prime Minister's evasions.
Yeah, no, it was ever thus.
Any questions, just as another subject.
No, it's been like that for a long time. I used to sit, I had a desk in the House of Commons in the press gallery sitting above where the Prime Minister's question take place, pretty much almost opposite the Prime Minister. I have to say, I've watched many of those for many years. I've never known a Prime Minister who actually answered a question. Every now and then a Prime Minister does, and everyone goes, oh, what happened there?
Exactly. Love the show, Julia. I agree with pretty much 100% of everything that's said.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate that. It's very kind. You don't have to agree with everything. Or still getting a lot of anger still on social media about Ukraine. A lot. And again, we're talking about that apparent Trump derangement syndrome. If you go, I really agree with him on this, I really agree with him on that, I would have voted for him, I like that, I don't agree with him on this particular subject, I think he's massively wrong on it. Trump derangement syndrome. You can't go around telling people that they're deranged about somebody if they're giving you a balanced view of what you think they're good at and what they're right on and what they're wrong on.
I don't agree with him on absolutely everything, even in defiance of
I don't agree with anyone
facts
on everything.
And gravity. It's his own form of Trump derangement syndrome, surely. Like, how can you be that blind to just the other side of the case?
But there definitely is a bit of that, isn't there? You know, the MAGA law. And as I wrote this in The Sun last week, just this idea, the real Trump derangement syndrome is the blind allegiance to anything anyone says. One of the reasons why I've not ever been a member of a political party is there's no party I've 100% agreed with or completely could, that's someone I could absolutely, there have been individual people actually from different parties that I've thought, do you know what? That's someone I could go and work for, and actually, I think what they're doing is really, really important and really moral and worthwhile, and will really improve the country. But again, of different parties. But there's no party even to this day, and I've changed my vote many, many times. I'm not, that's what I call it. I call it as I see it. I don't think there's a party that's talking sense or a politician talking sense in a particular policy. I call it as I see it, and I don't care if the Green Party ever came up with a sensible policy, I'd support that.
It might well happen
at
some point.
Happen.
By accident.
It might happen.
They got a knock on the head, and then suddenly, they came up with something a little bit different. It could well happen. But I do think that kind of blind fealty thing, it's probably a pretty small group, very overrepresented on certain social media channels.
Yeah.
You look what's going on in the polls and how people are responding to a lot of Trump stances. It's a bit different.
And even Reform supporters here, and we're coming on to that in the next call, how many Reform people are actually very much more, very critical of Donald Trump on this, even though they'd be, thrilled with pretty much everything else he's doing on immigration and wokeism and things like that. They're absolutely fully on board. But on this, they believe he's wrong. And again, I think it's much better if we just judge people by their actual actions.
Yeah, and stop confusing the sort of screams on social media for public opinion, which is something that the left did for a long time, and I think now sections of the right are starting to fall victim to that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Let's go to another phone call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You knew that already. Dave certainly did. He's in London. Dave, you wanted to talk about reform and their infighting. What do you want to say?
Yeah, thanks, Julia. Briefly on your Trump derangement syndrome, you're both missing the point. The MAGA support is falling from Trump. It's got nothing to do with Ukraine because they don't care about Ukraine. It's to do with the stock markets.
Yeah.
So that is the biggest story in America right now. The stock markets have collapsed.
Yeah.
They went down 4% yesterday. That means everybody's 401k in America has gone down by tens of thousands of dollars.
That's their pension, basically. Dave,
Hello?
Dave, I say the 401k. That's people's pension sort of money, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. My pension pot yesterday alone went down £27,000.
Ouch. Yeah, that's the thing. And again, tariffs coming in are going to make American consumers poorer because Donald Trump doesn't seem to understand they're just taxes. And he goes, we're going to reap in all that money. Yeah, but the money you're getting is from the American consumers.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, that was that point.
Yep,
but reform, lifelong Conservative voter, voted reform at the last election. Very concerned when Ben Habib went. Now it's Rupert Lowe. And now I'm at the point where I'm done with reform unless either Farage or Zia Youssef or both of them go.
Really?
I know people are going to say, yeah, well, we need him. But no, as Rupert Lowe was saying, Nigel is focused on the circus. He thinks he's Donald Trump going out to mega rallies in East Anglia and Essex and wherever else. The real issue is getting the policies sorted out, like, for example, getting rid of the Sentencing Council and cutting their powers.
Yeah.
It's those sorts of things that we want reform to do. And I believe now the Rupert camp, I don't believe I've watched Farage. He's dancing around this. He's gone onto a behavioural issue, which is nonsense. So I think I've got a feeling these May elections, that's going to cost them a win in many places.
Well, that's it. If you're only in the news because of if you're only in the news because of divisions, we know that voters don't like that. But it's interesting you said that. I'm a good friend of Richard Tice. I've got a lot of time for Richard Tice. He's on the show a lot. But even he was, he put his ego aside, let Nigel Farage come back as leader of the party because he knew that Nigel Farage he's got that X factor. Whether people like him or not, same as Boris Johnson, got that X factor. Some Tony Blair had it. Some politicians have it. Some don't. Rupert Lowe, I had him on the show many times. Very much like the guy. I think he talks a lot of sense on a lot of things. At the end of the day, most people in this country would not know Rupert Lowe if he walked into their front room that day. They probably think, "Who the hell are you?" I mean, the reality is people do know who Nigel Farage is. He has that star appeal. Do you really think that reform could do well without Nigel Farage?
I think you'll find that most reform voters are not that shallow. They do understand what the party is there to do, and they're starting to realise that Nigel is not really... He is putting himself above everything else, and it's starting to impact a lot of people that tend to vote reform. They're working this out, and they're not happy at all. People weren't happy when Ben Habib went. There was a lot of outcry about that happening. Now it's happened again. And we're starting to realise that Nigel... Well, you had Stephen Wolfe on your show, I think, yesterday, or Mike did, or somebody did.
I did, yeah.
And he said the same thing, and they've articulated it. And so they all want reform to win, but it looks like Nigel can't handle a decent team, and without it, he's done.
There is that issue about being more collegiate, but perhaps on all sides. But again, I'm not sure there's any political party leader who goes, yeah, it's absolutely fine to go and do an interview in which you refer to the party as a protest party led by the Messiah. I mean, you can't go around criticising the boss of your party. That's not how it works. Maybe everybody needs to kind of lower their egos. I'd like to point out, it's not often I do this, they're all men. They're all men involved in this. It's a lot of male ego, a lot of, frankly, I think this is a technical term, Ofcom, hello, lot of slapping willies on tables, I think, that's going on at the moment. That's what as a woman, I'm just saying there's just a lot of slapping appendages on tables.
Really didn't need that image, but...
Well, you're the one who gave us another image earlier. There we are, back about Kama Sutra and Keir Starmer. I mean, good Lord. Anyway, thank you very much, Dave. Really interesting call. Thank you very much indeed for that. 11:34 is the time. Sorry if you just spat your tea out. Up next, you know what I mean. Up next, going to talk to the Centre for Migration Control. They've done a load of freedom of information requests and finally managed to drag kicking and screaming out of the Ministry of Justice some extraordinary stats in terms of who's actually responsible for crime in this country. I know it's going to come as a huge surprise that, yes, foreigners are responsible for far more crime than their population should be responsible for. So why are we allowing people into this country to commit crimes, and why are we keeping them after they do? That's up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:37 is the time. Everyone's carrying on spitting out their tea at the mention of appendages, but grow up, everybody. Including, by the way, the people at the top of reform, I think we're all saying today. Let's talk right now about people coming to this country and committing crimes, because that is something that is clearly happening. We've been told that say that makes you bigoted and xenophobic, but facts aren't bigoted or xenophobic, as the research director at the Centre for Migration Control, Robert Bates, will have discovered. A very good morning to you, Robert.
Morning, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. These extraordinary stats, I mean, I say extraordinary, I don't think they're that much of a big surprise to an awful lot of us. When we look at these stats that you guys, with the Freedom of Information requests, have managed to drag kicking and screaming out of the Ministry of Justice, showing that foreigners may well be responsible for almost a quarter of all sex crimes in this country, and also for a high number of other acquisitive crimes, in particular two nationalities, Afghans and Eritreans, are more than 20 times more likely to account for sexual offence convictions than British citizens. We've clearly got a problem. Tell us a little bit more about the detail and how you managed and how long it took you to wrangle this information out of the government.
So it was a pretty long-winded process. It's not just been us that have been pushing the Ministry of Justice to publish this information. We've had the Reform MPs, we've had professors such as Matt Goodwin clamouring for this, we've had Tory MPs as well. Everyone's been saying that if we want to have a proper, holistic immigration system that actually works in the interests of the British public and isn't actually putting us at grave risk, then we need this information to be published regularly. I think the sexual offences statistics are the most potent and the most damning. I think they really reveal, I think in total there was about 87 nationalities across the board that have a higher conviction rate for sexual offences than the British public. There were about 25 that have a sexual offence conviction rate that's between 4 and 22 times higher than the British public. And this is the kind of information we can now see the patterns. We can now see which nationalities, which regions are more prone to be committing these kind of crimes. And I think we need to realise that an immigration system that doesn't take this kind of thing into account isn't doing us any good. We know there are vast differences between different types of migration. We know, for instance, that migrants from the EU are far more likely to be economic benefits in the long run and less likely to pose risks, and then they're also more likely to return home compared to those from outside the European Union. And if we really want to have policymakers that are implementing an immigration system that works in our favour, this is the kind of stuff that they should be factoring in. I think in total there were about 50,000 visas awarded last year to those top 25 nationalities for sexual offence crimes, which is just a crazy state of affairs that we're allowing to continue.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It is, again, and it is about the risk of, that you have. And it's the same, frankly. When you get off of the airport, at Gatwick, and then suddenly there'd be a whole load of customs officers you haven't seen for the last 2 years. Oh, that's because the flight's come in from Jamaica, and there's a massive drug problem with drug importation from Jamaica. Oh, OK. Or and then the other times you arrive, and there's no one there because there isn't a flight from a particular country that's got an issue with that. It's about playing the odds. It's about, how police operate stop and search. Are they searching a load of 80-year-old women wandering around a village in Dorset? No, they're not. They're stopping young men in hoodies wandering around central London or Birmingham or Manchester. This is about playing us, and yet for some reason we don't do that with our migration system. This certainly tallies with what young women have been saying to me in recent months. Alex Phillips has identified and then got castigated for, but was perfectly accurate about the particular issue of harassment of women on the streets by foreign arrivals. But I'm wondering if how much the figures are skewed by the fact that you're looking at most of these foreign arrivals, certainly from places like Afghanistan, Eritrea, will be young men. And we know that young men are most likely to commit pretty much all crimes. Pretty much all crimes are largely committed by young men. And whether that skews the stats at all.
It's an ever so slight difference, actually. It's not as surprising as you think. So if you compare the Afghan rate across the board, which is about 22 times, with once it's age adjusted, it's about 18 times. So the difference isn't that. And it's also important, and this is an important point, to factor into the British figure as well, the fact that we've seen a huge number of British passports handed out over the last few years as well, many to these individuals from nations that are topping up this list as well. That's something that's incredibly difficult to factor into this equation, given that it's just hidden behind the fact that this individual is a British passport holder. So there are absolutely demographic considerations that do need to be taken into consideration with this number. Yeah. But even if we're not comparing them to the British number, we should still be comparing them to each other. We should be comparing, say, a migrant from Australia with a migrant from Afghanistan.
Yeah. Who's going to be the best bet? That's the reality. But this is the thing. What I find also extraordinary is that the figures, believe that foreigners are convicted for up to a quarter of sex crimes. You're looking at 23%. 15% of sex offences are recorded, including rape, accounted for by foreign nationals, 21 to 2023. A further 8% of convictions recorded as unknown nationalities, likely to be non-British nationalities. How do they not know what their nationalities are, or are we not allowed to know what their nationality is? Because if someone's been convicted of a crime, I'd like to think we know who they are.
Yeah, I couldn't get my head around the huge number that was unknown as well, and I was speaking with a lot of experts in this area before we published this report to try and actually get to the bottom of it. I think there's a real hesitancy once an individual refuses to provide the nationality or is unable to provide documentation, which is a key indicator that they're probably not on the British systems and therefore not a British national, to keep pushing the issue. There's a kind of administrative malaise around that topic.
This is 1 in 12 men convicted of a sex offence in this country. We don't know where he's from. That's just unacceptable.
It's really damning, but I think it really does show where our civil service, our kind of public sector in many ways has been for far too long, and it's been allowed to drift to this position where it doesn't recognise that immigration touches every single aspect of our lives. It has an impact in every single way, and if you're not collecting the data, then you are really leaving us in what I've been referring to and others have been referring to as a data desert, where we can't make informed decisions going forward. The Home Office used to have a system in place where it was able to distinguish between nationalities, and it was able to flag on a red list certain nationalities and visa applications from those countries who were more likely to be a risk. They had to drop that in 2020 because there were appeals under the ECHR, the Equality Act, by a left-wing charity that meant, we can't go near that anymore.
But I mean, it's utterly bizarre. We know it was Denmark that actually started publicising these figures. We know that, I think Sweden just stopped collecting the data because it was all just a bit uncomfortable. And it's this idea that facts are somehow racist or bigoted or can be used by, quote, the far right to push against immigration. But who are the people who are saying, I think it's a really good idea that we bring in lots of people from a country or countries or regions where we have a much higher rate of offending, particularly serious offences like sex offending against women largely, we should absolutely not worry about that. I mean, as if we haven't got enough of our own sex offenders already. And again, we talk about, the Pakistani grooming gangs. Yes, of course, the vast majority of paedophiles and rapists of girls in this country are white men. Of course they are, because the vast majority of people in this country are white. However, this particular type of crime has a massively higher proportion of men from a particular area in Pakistan who either first or second generation migrants. That is worth knowing. I mean, it is just bizarre that for some reason we don't think that's worth knowing.
No, exactly. And I've seen the left really tying themselves in knots over these sexual offence statistics. Yeah. Their takeaway from it is that 75% of sexual offence convictions in the UK are done by the British population, and therefore why would we worry about the 25%? Yeah. Well, the fact is that 25% is an imported problem that we did have the choice not to inflict on our women and girls. And I think there's a real reluctance from the left to actually marry up their kind of social justice narrative with the proportion of equality.
Yeah, if he's a victim, he can't also be a perpetrator.
Well, that's exactly it. They've got themselves absolutely bound into knots with this. And it just holds the debate back. It's just frustrating. This is the kind of stuff that we should all recognise. These individuals shouldn't have been let into the country in the first place. And they certainly shouldn't be allowed to stay. Now, why are we having to debate what are pretty basic fundamentals of common sense?
I'd love to hear your thoughts just on Abu Wadi. He's the Palestinian migrant who's arrived on a dinghy last Thursday, been processed. No one noticed. Campaign against anti-Semitism pointed out this guy was basically someone who's openly, picture him with an assault rifle, supporting Hamas. Al-Aqsa talked about how we need to kill all Jews. He's in the country. He finally gets arrested, but only for illegally entering the country on Sunday, not for anything else. We're not going to be able to deport him because of human rights laws. I mean, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think the real problem here is that the main objection to removing him to his country of origin seems to be that he'd be being plonked back into a war zone. Well, given he has access to clearly a machine gun, I wouldn't argue he'd be too hard done by that. But the fact is that once the Labour Party scrapped a third country, third country deportation scheme, the Rwanda policy, we don't have the option to even remove these individuals at all. And therefore, there are lots of countries around the world who we're not able to actually deport individuals directly to because they don't have the infrastructure to process them, or they just don't want them back and won't engage with us. And that is why a third country is so important. The alternative, and this is probably what we'll end up seeing, is that they'll end up being given some quasi kind of asylum status for a perpetual period of time, and we can't remove them, and we're all at threat once again.
Absolutely. Robert Bates from the Centre for Migration Control, thank you very much. Well done getting that information. Tom said it is extraordinary how much the authorities, the great and the good, they do not want us to know facts, because facts might affect our opinions on things.
No, absolutely. There's just a refusal, excuse me, to look at this issue straight in the face. Try that again.
It's caught my cough.
Caught the cough. It's gone now. But yes, I think no debate is impoverished by having more information. Like, it's a good thing to be able to talk about these things openly, to uncover uncomfortable truths or to dispel common misconceptions. That should be absolutely fine. I think the problem is that there's just no discussion about this particular issue. There's a tendency just talking broad sweeping platitudes.
And shout bigot at anyone who says, let's talk about it.
Absolutely, to pretend like nothing has changed in terms of migration and asylum since the 50s, when obviously the world has changed immeasurably since then.
We've always been a nation of immigrants, apparently. I mean, again, complete and utter lie. I mean, just literally not true.
And people just start talking in lofty terms about, the post-war migration refugee settlement. These cases were not even envisioned when
sort of 10 or 20,000 people coming a year as opposed to over 1 million. I mean, no difference there. Nothing to see here.
The world has shrunk fundamentally, in terms of communication, in terms of the ability of travel, there's also been a lot of conflicts and so on. This needs to be talked about in a new way, and that means more data and more discussion.
Talk about it in a new way, i.e. factually. There, that would work. 11:48 is time. Love to hear your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000. Up next, going to try and get to the bottom of what the hell happened when two ships collided in the North Sea. How did that even happen, and what could the ecological fallout be? We'll talk about that up next. This is Talk.
Utterly convinced that Rupert himself had a mark on his back the minute Elon Musk endorsed him, because that's when Nigel was like, oh my goodness, I've got a guy in the party who's more popular across the Atlantic than I am, and Rupert is proving to be more popular in the UK than Nigel Farage is, and he can't bear it, so he wants to take Rupert out. And to try and destroy Rupert, not just discredit him, but to destroy him, is unacceptable, and therefore Nigel Farage should resign from Reform.
We're human beings. We all want to be top dog, Kevin, and we can't be top dog. That's just the problem. I can't be loved or liked by everybody. It's not possible. But we have our ups and downs, and hopefully you can make peace. You know, although I'm divorced, I still see my ex-wife. She still works for me, so it shows how good it is.
If you can work that out, then I'm sure Nigel and Rupert can work it out, except I know that Nigel and Rupert can't. But I do think, you know what they say, Herbie, a week is a long time in politics. By the time we go to those local elections, I think people will have forgotten.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater's still with me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. This is the fire still burning on an oil tanker carrying jet fuel and a cargo ship carrying highly toxic chemicals that collided in the North Sea on Monday morning. One crew member is still unaccounted for, and the search has been called off after an extensive search. Luckily, everyone else was able to get off board both of those ships. Let's talk about this with Andrew Tettenborn. He is a professor of commercial law. He's an expert in shipping law at Swansea University. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Julia.
I have to say, when we saw this story yesterday, I think a general view was sort of, how on earth did this happen? Particularly as we know that the oil tanker carrying jet fuel was actually anchored and was completely static. And this cargo ship, according to the radar data we've got, literally just aimed at high speed straight at this ship in the North Sea. And a lot of us just wondering, who are not involved in shipping, how on earth someone didn't see this huge big tanker in front of them, and why the radar didn't pick up, and why there aren't any authorities that would pick up on that and go, hey, you're about to hit another ship. How did this happen?
Well, I strongly suspect there's no limit to the degree of incompetence that you sometimes find in people. It has been suggested that this was some dark op by the Russians, which I must admit I very much doubt.
Not some sort of sabotage, because there is some talk, isn't it, because this is a US flagged oil tanker transporting American military supplies, that might be why.
But basically, I can't believe that because the Russians aren't stupid, and it would be just so difficult to go to a ship somewhere in Scotland, find out who was going to be officer of the watch at a particular time, slip him large wads of $20 bills, and say, just go straight into this ship. I'm open to persuasion, but my feeling is this is incompetence.
Yeah.
What you've got to remember is that these ships carry very small crews these days. There were probably only one or possibly two people on the bridge, and it's perfectly possible that the officer on the watch decided to go and do something else, leave the ship being run by automatic pilot. We don't know. Now, when the investigation happens, we're certainly going to have to ask some extremely embarrassing questions. Whether we can do anything about it's another matter, because the collision took place, I think, just outside our territorial waters.
Right.
So we may have to leave it up to the Portuguese government because the ship was registered in Madeira.
Right.
We may have to leave that up to the Portuguese government, but we're certainly going to ask some questions of the crew who've come ashore.
No, indeed. But presumably, though, I mean, these sort of tankers, these boats don't have a black box style like planes do.
Oh, they do.
They do. So there will be a record.
We're going to get. We hope we're going to get the black box, which incidentally is a yellow box.
Yep.
We hope we're going to get the black box. But no, if a ship is being properly run, this should never happen because it's got radar which will show up a blip several miles away. And if you have a blip dead ahead and there is someone on the bridge who's competent, they will say, wait a moment, we better do something.
I like to think that even I might have spotted that. And there's some talk, again, that it might have been foggy and misty, but again, that's what you've got radar for.
Well, yes, but radar sees through it.
But basically, is there any sort of body like, equivalent of air traffic control that is overseeing? So someone would have been, some authority is going, that ship appears to be heading directly on course to hit that ship. Should I alert them? Is there anyone that in charge of that would mayday the ship?
No, there isn't. Basically, it's up to ships to do their own navigation. But the port of registry and the place of registry has responsibility for them. And that's why we're expecting the Portuguese government to do something about it.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, of course, we've got to clear up the mess afterwards.
And how, as far as you're aware, how big an issue is that? Because there'll be the responsibility of, presumably, of the ship that of the Portuguese ship that actually, the cargo ship that hit the tanker, because the tanker was anchored. I'm not sure how they could be to blame for this. A lot of ships are anchored.
Oddly enough, Julia, no.
I'm learning so much here. This is great.
we can probably make a claim against the tanker, oddly enough, on the basis of some retained EU law, which I won't bore watchers with, but which effectively says that if oil of any kind escapes from a ship and goes on shore, then the owner of the ship is liable for the cost of cleaning it up.
Right.
But there's a fly in the ointment here, that all ships have the right to limit liability in respect of casualties. They limit liability according to the size of the ship.
Right.
Now, I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation, and it seems to me that the Stena Immaculate, the tanker, probably has a limit of about $24 million.
Which probably doesn't go very far. That sort of
may not go very far when it comes to cleaning up. And the Salon, which also could be chased, is a much smaller ship. That, again, back of envelope, I think is something over $6 million.
That's the Portuguese ship that actually crashed into.
That's right.
Okay, so we could end up having to foot the bill for clearing up, and of course there's the ecological risk to local wildlife as well.
Well, oddly enough, to some extent we can claim, insofar as we're making the wreck safe, that's not subject to limitation.
Right.
So we can simply send the bill to the P&I Club, which is the insurance company.
And they have to do it. I guess I'm wondering how you deal with two ships that have both been holed like this and what you do with it. Absolutely fascinated to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Andrew Tettenborn, Professor of Commercial Law and expert in shipping law at Swansea University. Tom Slater, I think we both learned an awful lot there. This is my theory, though. It never underestimating competence. No. Someone's nipped to the loo. Someone else was getting themselves a cuppa. No one noticed.
And I think, all the kind of cargo going back and forth all day, it's also just a law of probabilities, isn't it? There's going to be one of these things every so often.
Even though it doesn't happen very often, these things do happen. Again, I mean, it does seem very sad that we have seen one person who has died, but again, it could have been an awful lot worse by the sounds of it. Thank you very much indeed to Andrew Tettenborn. More from Tom Slater. Coming up, we're going to be talking about what's going on with these Ukraine negotiations with America. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. And whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you also to Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online, for joining me as well. With you all the way until 1 o'clock. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be turning our attention back to Ukraine. They attacked Moscow with drones overnight. It's the biggest Ukrainian drone strike on Russia in 3 years. One person left dead, multiple injuries. The attack came as crucial negotiations between the US and Ukraine in Saudi Arabia have begun. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has told President Zelensky that Ukraine will have to give up land seized by Russia as part of any peace deal. Plus, we're also going to be talking about the latest attack by trans activists on women's rights, because trans activism is just about seizing women's rights, because trans people, by the way, have all the same rights as everyone else. They just want more of them. A female gym owner has been attacked online by trans activists for banning trans-identifying men. They call themselves trans women. They are trans-identifying men from her new gym. Why has she banned them? Because it's for women only, and they're men, which means they're not women, which means they can't go to a women-only gym. I don't know why people find this complicated, but apparently they do. Anyway, we're also going to be talking about farmers who are going to be forced to sell fields for less than their potential value if they are seized to build new homes or hospitals under measures in the government's brand new planning and infrastructure bill being published today. We'll talk about more on that coming up. I'm always fascinated by these trans stories. They just never ever seem to end. And after the case that we've seen in Australia about women's only, just a basic women's only sort of comedy app being basically completely and utterly taken over by trans activists. It's just, I think women again. We've had enough now, thank you. We're just not playing anymore. Any support we can give to that gym owner, you have got it from us. Tom Slater, before we go to our first guest in this hour, I just want to reiterate calls where we're asking people to bring in. I mean, obviously call in on any topic at all, always welcome, but in particular, Britain getting stuck with a Jew-hating pro-Hamas Channel migrant who arrived last Thursday, wasn't arrested until Sunday evening after he was exposed for his outrageous, disgusting views and support for Hamas. We'll be stuck with him, though, because there's going to be human rights laws that he'll be able to use. Your reaction to that, give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk and your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. A lot of people getting in touch about that. But also about reforms, ongoing woes. Surprisingly, no calls at the moment about Ukraine, which is unusual because we talked incessantly about Ukraine for quite some time. Maybe that's why people are welcome to take a break. But do you think we are into endgame now in terms of the Ukraine war, more than 3 years on, that we are actually having proper ceasefire talks in Saudi Arabia, and that we actually may well see the end of that war?
Well, time will tell. I mean, it's definitely clear that both sides of the conflict, the invaders and the Ukrainian defences, have an interest in a cessation of the hostilities because of the fact this had become a very grinding, attritional conflict where, yes, Russia was making some gains, but they were relatively modest. They were expending a lot of blood and treasure in order to make the slow gains that they've been making over the course of the past year. Ukraine had manpower issues. Ukraine had all sorts of problems. It was something which clearly we were heading towards this point, with or without Donald Trump returning to the White House, arguably. The question is, what kind of deal is it? What kind of peace is it? Is it going to just be something where the conflict is frozen for a number of years and then becomes a chance for Russia to effectively rearm and then to go again?
So what it did after Crimea?
Or is it going to be something which could actually last for the longer term, which could actually lead to a conversation about how Ukraine will be able to defend itself properly? Again, time will tell, but you can't help but feel that given the rhetoric going into this, given Donald Trump posing as the kind of objective peacemaker and yet heavily praising one side, i.e. Russia, and saying they were ready to talk about peace. Meanwhile, they were continuing to bombard Ukraine at the same time as suggesting that Zelensky is some kind of sinister dictator who brought all of this on himself. You would be crazy to assume that this could work out well for Ukraine. There's always going to be hard choices here, but yes, it's. I think many people who are concerned about Ukraine's side in this will be watching these negotiations with bated breath.
I've always thought it's really, really simple. As Zelensky and others said very, very early on, it's very, very simple. Putin could stop fighting, and there would be no war. If Zelensky and Ukraine stop fighting, there will be no Ukraine. It is as simple as that. Well, look, at 7 minutes past 12, let's go to Steve Gilnay. He's former advisor to both Clinton and Bush Jr. administrations and joins us. A very good afternoon to you, Steve.
Hey, Julie, good to be back.
Thanks for joining us. So, look, we've got these negotiations going on. President Zelensky met with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. That was apparently something quite separately arranged in a trip yesterday. He's left now. Marco Rubio, your US Secretary of State, has made it very clear, though, look, you're going to have to give up land to get to any sort of peace deal. There's some talk about US intelligence sharing and US military aid being resumed at some point. Also talk about this mineral deal being back on the cards. How hopeful are you that there can be some rapprochement between Ukraine and the American leadership, but also possibility of some sort of permanent ceasefire?
I think the chances are difficult as long as Zelensky is still in power in Ukraine. Keep in mind that they had this mineral deal done. You had the Secretary of Treasury Bessent go to Ukraine to meet with him to get it signed, and he balked. Then he was going to sign it the next week. Then he came to Washington and was going to sign it while he was meeting with President Trump, and he balked. And then you had that, disastrous White House meeting that Zelensky has now sent a letter to President Trump apologizing for his behavior, which was one of Trump's requirements to move forward. I think, though, that the trust factor with Zelensky is absolutely gone. And you can't do a deal with people you can't trust. Julia, as a lawyer, I've told clients all the time, I'm a good lawyer. I can't draft a contract good enough to protect you from somebody who's willing to cheat. So if you wouldn't do a deal with somebody on a handshake, you're not going to be thing.
Here's the thing.
Contract.
That was the exact point that Zelensky was making to Donald Trump in the Oval Office when Donald Trump lost his mind and went and attacked him. He was pointing out, you can't trust Putin. Putin has signed, we had a ceasefire deal with Putin before. We did it after Crimea, and he reneged on every single thing he promised to do. So that a piece of paper, a ceasefire with Putin, isn't worth the paper it's printed on because Putin's not trustworthy. That was the moment when Donald Trump went off on one and started attacking Zelensky. Why does Donald Trump feel that Zelensky is someone he can't deal with, but Putin is?
Well, I think, again, you have to look at who else reneged on those deals. The U.S. and Britain promised they wouldn't expand NATO towards Russia. We broke our words, we broke our promises, and that helped really precipitate this.
No, I'm sorry. Ukraine had not joined NATO at that point. That does not justify the invasion of a nation state. Answer the question I actually asked Steve. Answer the question I actually asked you. Putin reneged on all the things he agreed to do after the invasion of Crimea, when everyone said that the Ukrainians had to do a deal with him. He's reneged. Why does Donald Trump trust Putin, but he doesn't trust Zelensky?
I don't agree with your framing. You had the Ukrainians continuing to attack eastern Ukraine, Russian.
They're literally their territory
for the last 10 years. For the last 10 years, they've been killing people in Donbass, in Donetsk, in Luhansk. That has been ignored. And when Putin said
they've been hitting back at rocket attacks from separatist forces. I'm pretty sure that's what pretty much every other government would do.
Well, they asked for their independence the same way that we did about 200 years ago. And yeah, we had a war over that.
Yeah.
We won our independence. And we're saying, let's have a vote. And there have been votes in those territories in the past.
Yeah, well, there are votes in Russian elections as well, and I'm not entirely sure we take them seriously. Again, why does Donald Trump trust Vladimir Putin more than he trusts Zelensky?
Well, I think Zelensky has repeatedly lied recently, and now you're trying to rebuild a relationship with Putin.
What has he lied about?
4 times. Well, 4 times he said he was going to sign the minerals deal, and every time when it got to putting pen to paper, he balked and started making new demands.
He hasn't. They're not new demands. He'd always asked for security guarantees. My guess is he thought when he went to the White House, he would use his personal charm, which has clearly worked on everyone else as well. He would be able to persuade Donald Trump, man in the room, to give some security guarantee. And then he realised there wasn't going to be a security guarantee. And by the way, it was Donald Trump who insisted he was thrown out of the White House. It wasn't Zelensky who stormed out before he signed the deal.
No, he kicked him out when he failed to do what he had repeatedly promised to do. And again, that's what broke the trust with Zelensky and any belief he will do what he says he will do. But in answer to your question, it's like Ronald Reagan used to say with our grand lady Margaret Thatcher, trust but verify. When you have U.S. resources and investments in Ukraine, that is the security, as President Trump keeps saying. When we have a financial investment, a financial partnership on the ground, that puts U.S. interest on the ground in Ukraine. Instead of boots on the ground, we have business on the ground. That is a security guarantee that will keep Putin at bay of trying to expand more.
I don't think that is a security guarantee. America has an awful lot of economic interests in places like Taiwan. I don't think that's necessarily going to deter the Chinese authorities when they decide to go and seize Taiwan. In terms of the negotiations going on, we understand that Jonathan Powell, who is the National Security Advisor to Keir Starmer, used to work at a very high level for Tony Blair, and he was involved very much in the Northern Irish peace agreement. He's set up a body which works since, in sort of dealing with international conflict and getting people to the table. The Basque separatists and others helped to negotiate a deal there. We understand he's been advising Zelensky's people about how to negotiate, not just with the Russians but also with America, to get what they want on the table. How hopeful are you that if these relationships can be reset without the personal issues between Donald Trump and Zelensky, that we can see a deal that would be something that Ukrainians can live with?
I think talking is always a big first step. We're seeing the same thing in Gaza with the Trump administration talking to Hamas, talking to Israel. When you're not talking, you're not making any progress. So the fact that there are talks underway is a good step in the right direction. But I would point out that one of the other reasons to not trust Zelensky is that he signed a 100-year deal with Keir Starmer for the same minerals he kept saying he was going to do a deal with the United States. He's literally side dealing on both sides, doing a deal to sell the exact same mineral rights.
He hasn't done a mineral deal with Keir Starmer.
Reportedly, he signed a 100-year mineral deal with Keir Starmer.
It's 100 years sort of like friendship. I don't believe that is correct at all, actually.
It includes the same minerals.
Well, the main thing is, I mean, again, most of the rare earth minerals, most of the things of value are, by the way, they're in the Donbass region, which has been seized by Russia. So I still don't know how America's going to get benefit from it, because unless you're willing to take the territory from Russia, you're not going to be able to have your men there working there, getting them out.
Some is in the Donbass region, but some extends past to the west of the Donbass region. But check it out, Starmer and Zelensky did a deal on the same rare earth minerals while he's pretending to do a deal with the U.S. That's another big stumbling block.
You don't think, I mean,
you can't trust Zelensky.
Zelensky may be many things, but I think stupid is not one of them. You think that wouldn't get away with it? I mean, that's not been mentioned by anyone else. I have a horrible feeling that's just from the dark ethers of the internet and it's not actually true. I mean, as is also the claim from Elon Musk, by the way, with no evidence whatsoever that this cyber attack on the X, formerly Twitter site, somehow could have come from Ukraine. Simply no evidence for this whatsoever.
Well, yeah, but this was just in the last 24 to 48 hours. It takes a while to unravel those things.
Cyber experts have said, because some of the ISP, they were in Ukraine. Well, they were all over the world. That's literally the nature of these attacks. They basically hijack internet service providers in all around the world. So it's just a load of nonsense.
And they bounce from spot to spot.
Yeah, exactly.
To spot.
So there's no evidence whatsoever.
Well, there's evidence. It's just, is there sufficient evidence to say this is exactly where it came from? And we don't know yet because cyber experts also have their own agenda.
Of course. I mean, we are into deep state stuff here. We really are, Steve. Steve, I've always thought of you. I mean, I love having you on the show. I've always thought you were a very, very, very sensible chap. But I mean, people talk about Trump derangement syndrome. I do worry that an awful lot of people who are very supportive of Donald Trump have got into their own version of Trump derangement syndrome, where believing everything that, the MAGA leader cult says, as opposed to looking at the cold, hard facts on the ground.
Well, again, I think most of what you have to look at is what are the results. We've been having, a lot of folks in the U.S. wanting to judge Trump's economic recovery 5 weeks into his presidency. It took Joe Biden 4 years to break the system. It's going to take a little bit longer than 5 weeks to fix it. So you can't blame President Trump for an economy that was broken by the previous administration, hidden by the previous administration, as they would do job figures. And
I'm not sure the tariffs are helping. I mean, tariffs are a tax on U.S. consumers. They're not going to help, are they?
Well, we've been attacked by others, including our friends there in Britain, with high tariffs on our products going your way and low tariffs.
No, you haven't. No, you haven't. Donald Trump thought that our VAT, our value-added tax, which is equivalent to your sales tax, was a tariff on U.S. goods, despite the fact that it's 20% that's on pretty much every single good that is sold in the country. I mean, there's a few things like children's clothing and food that don't have it applied. But that's not a tariff. That's just a sales tax. I mean, he doesn't even understand basic things like that.
It helps.
But it doesn't. But it's not a tariff. But it's not a tariff on any particular country's imports. It's a tax on everything that's sold. You have sales tax on everything in America.
But we have state
it's not a tariff.
level, which is quite a bit different. 7 to 9, not 20% on a VAT tax. It still adds to the price of what people are paying.
But the point of a tariff is it makes goods from a certain country more expensive by having a higher tariff. If the same tax is applied to every single item sold in a country, it doesn't have that impact. So to compare these things as the same things is nonsense.
Well, it's still what is being paid, whether it's a tax in part and tariffs in others. And again, with respect to Canada, when they're charging 250 to 300% tariffs on our butter, on our dairy products, it's insane for them to say a 20% reciprocity tariff is outrageous and we're attacking their economy. They have been charging high tariffs on us. And now when the U.S. says, look, we'll go to equal. You do the same thing, we'll do the same thing. How can you object to fairness and parity? Again, there are tariffs, not just value-added taxes, but tariffs imposed on U.S. products, including automobiles, by the EU and the Brits. That helps keep our products out of your markets.
I mean, you know, there's a reason why people don't buy American cars. They're not very good. Also, most American cars are too big for our roads. There's a reason why we don't buy them.
Now, I'll give you that. As I've walked,
but
through
it's not because of tariffs.
Downtown London, you know, I've been hit by the side of a car, by the rearview mirror before, walking down a narrow alley. I'll give you that. Our cars are too big for your narrow streets.
So it's not us being horrid to Americans. We love America. We just don't want to buy your rubbish cars. I'm going to include Teslas in that. I hate Teslas more than life itself. By the way, one of my team just did some research. I mean, again, I didn't think this was the case anyway. January the 16th, the UK and Ukraine signed a partnership agreement in Kyiv. It's a 100-year framework for cooperation covering defence, security, energy, culture, it says, and other areas. It doesn't explicitly mention minerals at all. There's been some speculation it could encompass mineral rights. But there's no selling, there's no deal. It's a framework for how we're going to cooperate going forward. There is no deal on mineral rights. That's simply what I believe we call fake news.
No, what it is we haven't seen the rest of the deal yet. I want to see all the details. Make it public. What if they agreed to, as you have these, you know, secret meetings going on between Starmer and Zelensky?
They're
What's the rest of the story?
They're not secret meetings. They're meetings between heads of government. That doesn't mean a secret. Again, the ability to sort of see a conspiracy.
I don't think they let you sit in on those negotiations to know.
No,
what are the side deals.
weirdly, no, people don't sit on negotiations that companies do either. I mean, there's the thing: we're not sitting in on the negotiations that Marco Rubio is having with the Zelensky's advisors today either. That's how you get things done.
But the problem is you've had Zelensky come out of these private meetings and make announcements that Marco Rubio says that's not what was agreed to. So again, the trust factor with Zelensky has been broken time and again.
Yeah, I mean,
I want to see the rest of the story between this Zelensky.
Do you agree with Donald Trump that Zelensky is the problem rather than Trump invading his country?
Well, Putin invading. I think that Zelensky's the problem because this whole conflict could have been avoided on the front end.
Could have been avoided, yeah. If Russia didn't invade, this conflict could have been avoided, Steve.
If you hadn't had Kamala Harris go to Zelensky and say, we're going to put Ukraine in NATO 3 days later, is when Putin's invasion started.
Let me just clarify. Vladimir Putin had been building up his forces. He'd written an essay more than a year earlier saying that he didn't believe that Ukraine was a sovereign national state and should be back as part of the Russian Federation, effectively. He already had amassed 120,000 troops in his tanks on the border. But you think that it was just the Kamala Harris amazingly having some impact, shocker, that meant he somehow was forced to go in.
Just because we know she was an idiot doesn't mean that the Russians didn't believe she was speaking for NATO and the U.S., because the word going in was, we're going to expand NATO into Ukraine, which is a breach and clearly a red line that Putin and Russia wasn't going to tolerate.
I hate to tell you, but you know that America had actually pledged to protect the Ukrainian nation-state borders. The only reason why Ukraine wanted to join NATO was because of the threat from Russia, which they were quite right about. It's the reason why, you know, countries like Finland have joined NATO, because they've realised that actually it's not safe not to be in NATO.
Well, I think if you started having, Russian military installations put right on the border in Scotland or in Ireland, you guys might have an issue with that.
Yeah, I think we might, because Scotland and Northern Ireland are British.
Right. I think if they started putting Russian military installations in Canada, like some in Canada,
I think if we'd been threatening those nation states with invasion, can you tell me the last time, or indeed any occasion, in which any NATO state has invaded Russia, or indeed any other state?
Well, do we count Ukraine as a NATO state or as a protectorate because it invaded Russia in Kursk, although they're seeing their soldiers and armament destroyed right now? They invaded the Kursk region of Russia.
And what would have made them do that? Oh, I can't think.
It was absolutely insane because they've lost tens of thousands of men and armament on what was a PR push in an area of Russia that did not matter. They just wanted to be able to, quote, trade that land to get back areas that identify as Russia.
So it's almost like you've just explained why they did that.
Yeah, they were looking for a PR push, and it cost them
not a PR push. They're looking for negotiations. So they've taken some Russian territory in a bid to get back some of their own territory. Just clarifying. I just want to know
how's that working
roughly. How's that working? Which 20% of America would you be willing to give up if Russia decided they wanted it?
San Francisco and L.A. Parts of Hollywood.
Great answer. I'll give you that one, Steve. I'll give you that one. I mean, you know perfectly well, even with all the failings of California, you would not be willing to give up 20% of American territory to a Russian invading
Eastern
force.
Ukraine, they identify as Russian, they speak Russian.
A number of people do, not everybody did. Well, you know, if a load of people started identifying as Canadian in northern states in America, I don't think you would allow the Canadians to seize that territory, would you?
Well, Alberta's wanting to vote to see if they might be able to join the U.S. Not the entire Canada,
Voting
but at least Alberta might want to be part of the U.S.
Do you see how voting might be a bit different? Steve, I think we're going round in circles. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm tearing my hair out, but there we are. I've not got much to tear out. Steve Gill, former advisor to Clinton and Bush administrations. Tom, and I mean this, I know Steve's still listening, and as I said to you, I've always thought of him as very sensible and everything, but genuinely, people are fully signed up to, I'm going to say, this utter madness that Ukraine is the problem in this war.
No, absolutely. I mean, you could fairly say that, like, the West has played this terribly over the course of many years. That
doesn't mean that justifies.
No, absolutely. I'm very sympathetic to the argument that NATO expansion was a sort of grand folly. At the same time, that doesn't justify the invasion. Like, everything that leads up until that point is a fair thing to discuss. The point at which the tanks from the neighbouring giant country roll in, that's not as if that should suggest that it's Ukraine's fault.
But there is an element where Ukraine is either an independent nation state or it's not. And if it is, and it wants to join a defensive force against the might of its horrible, invasive, aggressive, murderous, dictator-run nation state, then it has the right to do it. I doubt it would have been given NATO
Well, that was the thing. It was always disingenuous as well. I think it put Ukraine in the worst possible position where they were, again, dangled something that they were never actually going to be given, which gives Russia a pretext to invade with their supposed security guarantees.
Russia would have used any pretext. I think Russia is one of the... Putin would have taken any... There didn't have to be a pretext. He was going to do it. He just uses whatever he can.
They certainly have their own interest in this, but I think it left Ukraine in the worst possible position where, again, this was dangled before them. There was never any intention to follow through on it, and this is where we've ended up. But as I say, you can take in part all of that context. That doesn't justify or explain away what's taken place. I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear your thoughts, or phone calls already coming in. Lots of calls already coming in, lots of other topics we're talking about as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll get to those messages coming up. After that, we are going to be talking to the brilliant Sharon Davies about, trans activists once again muscling into women's spaces. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
So after they've broken into our country illegally, and we've put them in a 4-star hotel and given them £43 a week, given them free food, free doctors, free dentists, free lawyers to fight their case to stay. After we've done all that, we then spend money on, for example, for them to enjoy trips to the zoo, tennis lessons, visits to football stadiums, days out, language lessons and friendship services. I have no idea what that is.
We're human beings. We all want to be top dog, Kevin, and we can't be top dog. That's just the problem. I can't be loved or liked by everybody. It's not possible. But we have our ups and downs, and hopefully you can make peace. You know, although I'm divorced, I still see my ex-wife. She still works for me, so it shows how good it is.
If you can work that out, then I'm sure Nigel and Rupert can work it out.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Just some breaking news from the Metropolitan Police. So they have now launched an investigation into allegations made against the, until this last week, Reform MP Rupert Lowe. Allegations made that he had made violent threats, verbal threats of violence against Sir Yusuf, the party chairman. He, of course, has denied those, but the Metropolitan Police, they have launched an investigation into those verbal threats. Also, just to let you know, we're talking a bit earlier about the Kyle Clifford sentencing. He's the man responsible for the triple murder and rape of his ex-girlfriend and murder of her sister and her mother. And this is Louise Hunt, Hannah Hunt, and their mother Carol Hunt. They are the family members of John Hunt, of course, the BBC racing correspondent. The Kyle Clifford has refused to attend court. He's in a wheelchair himself after not only killing two sisters with a crossbow, but killing himself, attempted to kill himself, we believe, with a crossbow, permanently disabled in prison. But the judge has refused to actually force him to come to hear the sentencing and indeed victim impact statements. But John Hunt, who's lost not only two of his three daughters, but his wife as well, he described Clifford as a psychopath. He said he suffered from misogyny off the scale. He described him as callous. And he said, I hope women around the world will take Louise's bravery as a shining beacon for their lives, because she left Kyle Clifford saying enough is enough, and was very unhappy with his treatment of her. So we'll keep you up to date on any more developments on that. Right, now let's go to your phone calls. Let's talk to Carlos. He's in Essex. He's given us a call on 0344 499 1000. Very good morning. So good afternoon to you, Carlos. What do you want to say?
Julia, I don't understand what's going on in our country. As far as I was aware, the first responsibility for any government is to make sure that the people that live in our country are safe.
Yeah.
So why would they let people in our country that are blatantly telling us that they're murderers, they hate us?
This is Abu Wedi, who's openly professing himself as wanting to kill all Jews, pro-Hamas, supported October the 7th, and here he is in the country.
Yeah. And then you get, like, conservative commentators from America, they get banned from coming to our country just in case they upset Muslims in our country.
Yeah, I mean, who is it who's been banned from coming here?
It was, when we was having the referendum, there was about 2 or 3 American commentators, conservatives. They were now actually banned from coming over. They were blocked from our government from actually coming over because they said that they were going to upset the Muslim community.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. There are some commentators who, there's a difference between talking about tackling, extreme Islam, but people who are saying, like Donald Trump said, ban all Muslims, people from Muslim countries. Sorry, I think that is a very different thing. So, I mean, again, I can't remember the details of that.
No. So one person's coming to our country because they're talking, and they could have extreme views, other than maybe wanting to kill someone or anything like that. However, we have someone that's come over on a boat.
We let them in. But here's the thing: we let these people in, which they shouldn't. I don't think these people should ever set foot on our territory, and they should be returned the day they arrive if they do get in. But if this guy applied for a visa and we knew about him, I doubt very much he would be allowed in. But that's the problem. Oh well, don't worry. You just get yourself on a dinghy, pay £3.5K, and off you go.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Of course it doesn't. It's immigration policy. Why would it make sense, Carlos?
Yeah, no, but why are we following the dictates of something that we signed a very long time ago? See, now we are. Well, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to follow that dictate that's going against our own safety, our own country's well-being.
I know.
It doesn't make sense.
The great and the good seem to think that it does, but they are completely wrong. And until the voters actually make sure that they have to make sense, they're going to carry on doing it. Carlos, appreciate your call. I'm sure everyone's agreeing with you. Apart from, the great and the good and North London dinner parties that Keir Starmer attends. Let's go to Phil. He's in Hertfordshire. Hello, Phil. You want to talk about reform? Good afternoon, Julia. Yes, I do.
Julia, as a reform voter, I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed with, I'm going to call it mild hysteria, that I'm hearing from those Reform Party members. Are going to leave. Yeah. They're going to vote. Let's just let the dust settle and remember and go back to why we're voting for reform and look at the bigger picture. Yeah. There's an internal spat going on. They'll get it sorted out one way or the other. But we have to remember why, when I say we, I'm talking about the reform voters. Why are we behind reform? Why are we voting for reform? Because we've had a gutful of the Tories. We've had a gutful of Labour, even more so, now they've been in power and they're doing what they're doing to the country. Why are you going to start saying, I'm not going to vote for reform anymore?
Yeah, so what are you going to do? Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Just hold the fort, stand firm and just wait, It's annoyed me when looking at all these people and hearing them saying, I'm not going to vote for them anymore. It's ridiculous. It's very shallow.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think everybody is. There's far too, as you wrote, far too much hysteria on all sides on all of this. I have to say, Phil in Hertfordshire, thank you very much indeed. Going to take a quick break. Up next, going to talk about the ongoing hysteria about trans activists who insist on being allowed into safe spaces for women, places that women want to just be around other women, but men who claim to be women insist that they have a right to, even though they don't, because there's a clue in the name, they're men and not women. We're going to talk to Sharon Davies about the latest instance of this, with a female gym owner basically facing online attacks for refusing to allow men into her women-only gym. You'd think there'd be a clue in the name, wouldn't you? This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater is still with me. Tom, just a simple question. I mean, you are a I hate this term, a cis man, as in you're a man who identifies as a man. So just, a man. So he's just used to a man.
You've got no right to out me like that.
I don't know what your preferred pronouns are, but I'm going to guess with he and him. Yeah. We no longer do this anymore since Trump. But if there was a gym in your open local area, maybe it was the nearest gym and you heard it was really, really good, but it was women only, would you try and join it?
No, for two quite principled reasons. One of which is I avoid gyms in general.
That's
not
a very,
big fan of the
very
exercise.
good point.
Second of all is it's a women-only gym, and I think if someone is desperate to gain entrance to it, that should raise questions about what their motivations might be as much as anything else. Like the women's spaces exist for a reason. I don't know why it needs to be. Yeah, I don't know why the ins and outs of that needs to be worked out, but that is the world that we live in, kind of post. Gender
here's
ideology,
my thing, because you're a normal bloke, right? Because normal blokes don't want to, and I say normal, I mean in the widest possible sense, as in you just don't want to impose yourself on women's spaces. And yet, trans activists who claim to be women, but are in fact men, because that's what a trans-identifying man is, a trans woman is just a man, they are feeling rather differently about the gym opened by Natalie Barnett. She's the founder of the Girls Spot Gym, again, clue in the name, and she decided to open this gym in Wandsworth in southwest London just for women. She said it would be a single-sex space for biological women. She said a lot of the women who come just face quite a lot of sort of aggression and unpleasant behaviour from men, and actually just simply wanted to be around other women when they were working out. What's the big deal? Well, trans activists don't like it. Let's talk about this with Sharon Davies. She's an Olympic medalist swimmer, of course, and author of the brilliant book Unfair Play, The Battle for Women's Sport. Very good afternoon to you, Sharon.
Hello, Julia. Straight from the gym, as you can see.
Oh gosh, this is why you look that amazing. Oh, I've got to be honest with you. I'm with Tom on this one. But it is, I'm not a big fan of gyms generally, I have to say. But it is just one of those bizarre things, isn't it? There's a reason why women would like to train often in a gym or in other places, be in a women's only space, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have protected women's spaces here in the UK. The Equality Act enables that. We have schools that are just for girls and they will only be for biological girls. We have sports now, thank goodness, that, in some sports, not all sports, but in lots of cases where they protect it. So we know that the law enables this. So this bullying from the trans activists is exactly that. And what I find very frustrating is it's always women that they bully.
Yeah.
It's not men. So, for example, Duncan Bannatyne, obviously runs a chain of gyms, and his gyms are mixed sex, but the changing rooms are very definitely biological female. Now, they don't bully Duncan because Duncan would be very, A, he's a man, and B, he'd just tell them where to go. It's always females that are being battered. And the thing that I saw this morning, I don't know whether you saw it, but it's stuff like this which drives me nuts. So the St. John's Ambulance this morning was talking about CPR. Did you see this?
No.
And they put people with breasts are statistically less likely to receive bystander CPR than men. Let's change that.
Who are the
so men? Men are still being referred to, but women now we're people with breasts.
I've seen some moves on some men in their time. Maybe they meant that, but no. But that's it. But you're right. The language has always changed around. Again, the birth giving people in the NHS as well. There's a word for that. Women who are in labour. But this is the thing. It is unbelievably obvious that this is not about trans rights. There is nothing stopping.
Men's rights movement.
It's a men's rights movement. There is nothing stopping someone who identifies as trans, whether they are a man or a woman. And by the way, they can't change their sex. They just identify as different gender, which they're free to do as long as they don't try and steal the rights of the gender they don't actually belong to. And they can go to a gym and they can go and exercise along with other men and other women or whatever. That's no issue. This is specifically for. And again, I don't like using this term biological women. We don't need to say biological. There's only one kind of woman, women. Yeah. This is a gym for women, and therefore men aren't welcome. And any man who claims that he is, quote, a woman, he will know when he says he's a trans woman, what he means is, I know I'm a man and I'm not really a woman. I mean, the trans bit is the giveaway there, and would understand if he really understood, because in his soul he is a woman, he would understand why a woman might not want to have this bloke exercising next to her.
But with all honesty, anyone that is biologically male has no idea what a woman feels like, because you can't. If you're not a female, all that you can identify with is a stereotype the society is actually telling us. So, long hair, pink, long nails, dresses, whatever. I mean, let's be very honest. How many of us girls actually do that? I mean, I can't remember the last time I was in a dress.
Well, no, apparently it's all to do with whether you wear heels. Because I mean, I remember we were told by Eddie Izzard that when he wears heels, then he's a girl, and when he doesn't wear heels, now I'm wearing my trainers again as usual today.
It's so insulting.
So I'm a boy
today.
Actually,
yeah. Exactly. To be ground down to literally the clothes that you put on, that's how it actually defines who you are, is utterly ridiculous. There's also a very big reason why this lady is creating this gym, because a lot of women, whether it's sexual harassment, the fear of violence, whether they've actually had sexual harassment and rape in their past, and they want to get to a gym and work out and feel as if they're safe in that environment.
For me,
There's
it's
a very,
the noise.
very big reason for it. 99% of sexual assault is men on women, and so women need these spaces to feel safe.
Exactly, but it's the noise in the gym. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of, when I did used to go to gym, I work out at home now, I can't be doing with it, but it's sort of a lot of men sweating over everything and doing a lot of there's a lot of macho-y stuff.
Some women do that too.
It's not.
Some women do it too.
I'd be very impressed with you in the gym, but it just, it's just not an environment a lot of women want. But again, this thing, why do they feel the need to have it? There's this idea that they believe that, or claim to believe that they think they're women, these men, but then they demand that everyone else plays along too. And that's the issue, isn't it? And that's where you and I, who would be perfectly welcoming as somebody, wear what you want, call yourself what you want, that's fine.
Absolutely.
But you don't get to demand that I play along too.
Yeah, that's absolutely the point, isn't it? I believe in biology. I believe in the reality of biology. And I think in years to come, we will look back at this period and we will go, what the hell were we thinking? Obviously there's this encroachment on women's spaces, but there's also what we're doing to young people, in telling them that they're born in the wrong bodies and they're not perfect the way that they are, and an awful lot of this, unfortunately, is men being told, no, you cannot come into this space, and they don't like it. And they behave like men. These are supposedly trans-identifying women behaving just like men.
Almost like the reason why women didn't want them. I mean, you just mentioned that in terms of children as well. We talked to James Esses about this yesterday, but the fact that Wes Streeting, the health secretary, who we thought was being pretty sane on a lot of this stuff, post the Cass review, like many people who accept the Cass review findings, had basically kept their head in the sand and avoided the debate, even though there was nothing in the Cass review that wasn't new to you and me. We that was all publicly available stuff. But basically, is going to allow, we understand, a trial of puberty blockers on children. We've already had a trial on puberty blockers. Thousands of children have been given them. We know the terrible impact of them. Would you be willing to take part in that judicial review to prevent that from happening?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think this is, the biggest disaster to our young people in medical history ever. And the backlash is going to be for decades to come. I speak out in particular because I was around during that East German era, and I know what giving testosterone to young females will actually do to young female bodies. It kills them, and it makes them sterile, and it means that they can't have children, and and they have huge health issues for the rest of their lives. So we're taking perfectly healthy young people who may have a dysphoria and aren't happy with the body that they have, but it is the body that they have, and it's a perfectly healthy body, when historically 98% of them will have grown out of this by the time that they get to adulthood, and many of them are actually end up being gay, and we're making them patients for the pharmaceutical industry for the rest of their lives. And it's criminal what we've been able to do to young people, and then what we've also been able to do to women, women in sport, and women, even women now, whether they're being nominated for Academy Awards, don't even get the whole of their category any longer. We've now got to share that with men who identify as women. And it never goes the other way.
Never.
And what people don't really realise is that there's 5 times as many young girls being affected by this than boys. Because the boys and the men are the loud ones that always complain when they don't get what they want. But actually it's girls which are being horrendously affected by this, because they're told unless they fit a stereotype, they must be a boy. And I don't know about you, but I was one of those tomboys as a kid. I was always up a tree, broken teeth, playing with the boys, short hair. I wasn't playing with dollies and wearing pink all the time. I was quite competitive, surprise, surprise. I was never a boy. And my biggest achievement now as an adult is being a mother. And it breaks my heart that many of these young girls will have that removed from their future.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm your biggest fan, Sharon Davies, but I definitely don't want to be next to her in a gym. Sharon Davies, Olympic medalist, swimmer, and author of Unfair Play, The Battle for Women's Sport. Go and have a shower, lady. Tom said it is the thing. She makes the point, and it's such a funny point. This never happens. It's not women who identify as men who are making these demands. It's always men who who claim to be identifying as women. I don't believe that most of these men actually think they are.
And it also gets to the heart, doesn't it, of why sex-based rights exist, primarily for women's safety and dignity.
Yeah.
That's why this is such a fraught issue. It's not because, as soon as you traverse the boundary in any direction, it's the same thing. No, it's fundamentally different when you have a male in a man in a women's space.
It's just completely different.
And I think a lot of people have had to have a kind of crash course again on why those rights were so important. Why they were so
didn't
hard
come
won to
about
begin
just
with.
by accident. There was a reason why women fought for them, exactly. 12:48 is the time. We're going to get you up to date, I guess, on what's been going on with that the sentencing of Carl Clifford in just a few moments. Also going to be talking about why farmers could be forced to sell their fields for less than their potential value under the new measures of the government's planning and infrastructure bill published today. That's up next. This is Talk.
Well, we have absolutely no idea. It's just mind-boggling because this is, you know, it's not unusual that there would be an inquiry into something as grave as this, where there's so many unanswered questions. And I mean, Southport immediately had an inquiry, and obviously that is exactly what should have happened in that situation. And then Nottingham was given an inquiry a couple of weeks ago. So why on earth can't we have an inquiry?
Utterly convinced that Rupert himself had a mark on his back the minute Elon Musk endorsed him, because that's when Nigel was like, oh my goodness, I've got a guy in the party who's more popular across the Atlantic than I am, and Rupert is proving to be more popular in the UK than Nigel Farage is, and he can't bear it, so he wants to take Rupert out. And to try and destroy Rupert, not just discredit him, but to destroy him, is unacceptable, and therefore Nigel Farage should resign.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:51 is the time. Right now, let's talk about the government's new planning and infrastructure bill published today, and why this is bad news for farmers. They could be forced to sell their fields for less than their potential value if they are seized to build new homes or hospitals. Let's talk about this with Tim Bonner. He's the Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Well, I mean, look, we've already got a system where if there is a sort of public interest, people could be forced to sell their property, including farmers selling their fields. Why is this change in the law going to be a big issue for farmers? Why is it going to basically mean that they get less money?
Well, it seems that
there's a conflation by this government between wealth and land ownership, which is, wealth is fine in any other aspect, but not in owning land. We've had this whole business over inheritance tax and farmers having to face up to paying some big bills to the tax man. Now it's being suggested that instead of a market value, essentially, for your land, if you hope, and it's called the hope clause, if you hope that in the future your land might come up for development because there's housing next door or something like that, you put an additional value on that. What the government's saying is that can be compulsorily purchased to build a hospital or a school, and they'll only pay you the going rate for agricultural land. They're not going to pay you for that hope value.
So previously you would be entitled, if it was developed and you got planning permit, either developed already or you had planning permission to build on it, that you'd get that value. Now you're basically getting, well, it doesn't matter, it's just a field. You just get the value of the field as it is now.
Absolutely, and there's we're very positive about much in the new planning guidelines. We've got to be honest. There are far too many barriers to development. We need more jobs. We need more homes for people, whether it's in the town or the countryside. But this is something a bit different. Yeah. This is the state essentially saying we're going to put a value on the land. It's collectivism almost.
Yeah. But also, and again, I'm like you. I desperately want some more properties built, and I do think this notion of the green belt, and actually it's not the green belt. It's kind of the brown belt, the grey belt. That we should be building on that. That's where building homes that people want to live with a bit of space and with gardens and where they can raise their homes, raise their children. But here's the thing. Again, it seems to me that and there are going to have to be some compulsory purchase orders. We see that for HS2 or anything else. At the end of the day, though, we need to adequately compensate people. I would say generously compensate people. That seems to be what would be the fair thing to do. And especially this comes at a time with the inheritance tax and the concerns from many farmers that so many of them won't be able to afford to pay that inheritance tax. Okay, at 20%, not 40%, but nevertheless, money they don't have. And they're only going to be able to do that by selling their land. So you've got a double whammy, being forced to sell your land, and that land may, if it was in these sort of situations, basically not getting the value it truly has.
Yeah, and let's not just focus on the inheritance tax. Farming is a really, really tough business. Oh, yeah. Way beyond that. Huge changes to the support farmers are getting. There's huge demands on them. The market is tough. If you're selling, there are a lot of people out there making very, very little money at the moment, if anything at all. Fundamentally, this isn't something that they need to hear on top of that.
No, exactly.
I'm really sad that we had a new government, a big majority. There was a great love-in before the election between Keir Starmer and Steve Reid, the then Shadow DEFRA Secretary, now DEFRA Secretary. That things were going to be different this time. There wasn't going to be this sort of split between the Labour government and the countryside, and we still remain very positive about that. We think the way forward, but there seems to be one issue after another where the countryside is being singled out, and I'm really, I think that's really sad, because there should be a positive relationship between government and whichever government's in power and rural interests.
Indeed, and again, understanding, the more than half of the food that we eat in this country is produced by British farmers. We need farmers to stay in business. We need to be more food secure, and farmers, and again, I've said it a million times, but Jeremy Clarkson really helped explain to, city dwellers like myself just how hard the existence is for so many farmers. Is there any evidence that the government is listening at all?
Not on this issue as yet, or on the inheritance tax issue. Let's be honest. I think there's going to be some big challenges as we go forward in terms of farm support. The market, frankly, doesn't support farming in the way it is in this country at the moment. For years, for generations, subsidy of one sort or another has kept food prices down in the supermarkets. That's the farmers have continued to deliver. Yeah. That is all changing, one issue after another are hitting the bottom line. The countryside is concerned. It's really worried about the future, as it was before the election.
Indeed. Well, you've got our support here at Talk, and many of our audience as well. I'm sure we'll speak to you again, Tim Bonner, Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance. Time is almost against us here. Just a final quick word from Tom Slater on that.
No, I think it's just clear that these issues aren't going away because the farmers are refusing to let them go away. Yep. And I think Keir Starmer is learning to his cost, as previous governments have, that you shouldn't get on the wrong side of people who operate very large machinery.
Yeah, and you actually, essential personnel, like bin collectors in Birmingham, essential personnel, not what us bunch of losers do. People do actually do jobs that actually really matter.
They'll notice if they don't show up. Yeah.
You notice, exactly. They notice if you don't show up. You can't take a few days off sick. They notice. Just to let you know, by the way, we heard it in the last half an hour or so, the Metropolitan Police have begun an investigation into these allegations of verbal threats which have been made against Rupert Lowe, the now no longer Reform MP. In the last few moments, Rupert Lowe has tweeted he's instructed lawyers to represent him. He says, my lawyers have made contact with the Met Police, made them aware of my willingness to cooperate in any necessary investigations. They've not yet received any contact from the police. And he points out it is highly unusual for the police to disclose anything to the media at this stage of an investigation. He says, I remain unaware of the specific allegations, and in any event, I deny any wrongdoing. The allegations are entirely untrue. Really interesting. Amazing how much this has spiralled out of control, isn't it? Joining us right now is Ian Collins. I know you were talking about this a lot on the show yesterday as well, but it's ongoing.
Do you know what came up yesterday from quite a lot of people? This idea of the police being called over, an argument, whatever. We don't know what it will turn out to be, etc. But there was that sense that this is what other parties might do. But in Reform, we go down the pub, we have a couple of pints, and we sort it out.
I mean, have a punch up in a car park if you need to. Do it like real men.
Yeah, but now the old Bill are kind of called in on this one.
But again, why are the police making statements? They haven't even made contact with Rupert Lowe. Why are the police making statements about it?
Unless there was some reason to put something to... I've no idea.
But why? You haven't even spoken to someone. An allegation is made. At least allow someone to have a private conversation and
100%.
put their own evidence forward about why...
You might think so.
You're no longer innocent until proven guilty.
But it's interesting looking at social media how some people, real die-hard Reform supporters saying, I'm out. I'm not part of this. I don't want to be a member of the party. Which begs the question as to how those people would now vote. There's a by-election coming up.
Where does that leave people? We had a call a little bit earlier and he pointed